The anime begins with the protagonist complaining about the shutdown of the servers of the game he had been playing for 3 years. To him, that type of game was worthless, since he was looking for something truly challenging. A game so difficult that it would take at least 10 years to be completed. With this in mind, he decides to search for a hardcore game, known for having terrible balancing. During his search, he ends up finding a suspicious website that advertised a game with no defined ending. As a true game enthusiast, it was obvious that he would enter that site. While browsing through the difficulty options, his eyes are drawn to the so-called Hell mode. This immediately excites him, as it was a level of challenge completely different from anything he had ever seen. After selecting this difficulty, the next step is choosing a class. Among all the available options, he chooses the most complicated one of all, the Summoner class. At the moment he confirms this choice, he discovers that he has been automatically placed in the social class of a servant. As soon as he finishes all the settings, something unexpected happens and he ends up being pulled into the screen of his own computer. Soon after, he awakens in another world, now in the body of a newborn baby. His father holds him in his arms and decides to name him Alan. The scene then moves forward to some time later. He silently reflects that, in his previous life, he was a 35-year-old office worker, burdened with debt, with no talent for relating to other people, and went by the name Kenichi Yamada. However, he had reincarnated into that strange world and was now only 1 year old. Even without being able to speak, he was perfectly capable of understanding everything that was said around him. Alan was born into a family of servants, exactly as described on the game's website. The village where he lived was located near the border, and its inhabitants had to pay taxes to a feudal lord in exchange for the right to cultivate those lands. His father was named Rodden, and his mother went by the name Therja. For now, he was an only child, but he believed that he would soon have a sibling. When they notice that the boy is sleepy, his parents take him to bed. As soon as they leave the room, Alan tries to access his status window, but nothing happens. This irritates him, since he should have possessed summoner abilities from the very beginning. He tries once more, but this time he performs the command only in his mind. Thus, a grimoire finally appears before him. Startled, the baby lets out a scream. His parents immediately rush in to see what had happened, but Alan acts quickly and pretends to be asleep. Convinced that everything is fine, they leave the room. As soon as he is alone again, Alan summons the grimoire once more. Upon opening it, he is able to view his attributes. On another page, he finds detailed information about his summoning and creation abilities. At the moment, he was only capable of summoning insects and animals of rank H. A new page opens, displaying a message from the god of creation, who apologizes for the delay in delivering the grimoire. Ignoring this for now, Alan tries to summon an insect, but fails. Thinking of an alternative, he decides to use the creation ability first. By doing so, he manages to create a grasshopper card. However, before he can attempt to summon it, his mother enters the room. Once again, he pretends to be asleep. After she leaves, Alan realizes that he is extremely tired and decides to leave the summoning for the next day. The following day, everything proceeds normally, with the villagers working in the fields. When he finally manages to be alone, Alan uses his summoning ability and a grasshopper appears before him. He tries to give orders to the insect, but receives no response, which makes him imagine that it might be some kind of game error. He then checks the grasshopper's information in the grimoire and decides to name it Denka. By analyzing its effects, he realizes that the creature granted a 1-point increase in endurance and agility. After several days of training and improving his abilities, Alan finally manages to summon an animal of rank H, a small mouse that is given the name Mousy. Just like Denka, the little mouse was not very intelligent. Even so, at least both of them obeyed when given simple commands. The mouse's ability was running, while the grasshopper's was jumping. By examining the grimoire more carefully, Alan discovers that he could store up to 10 cards of each creature. He learns that the bonuses granted by these cards were extremely important. For example, by storing 10 mouse cards, his attack attribute increased by 10 points. Thanks to this, he already possessed enough strength to easily surpass what any ordinary baby would be capable of. Even so, leveling up and learning new abilities was 100 times more difficult due to the choice of Hell mode. Shortly after, Rodden announces that he has returned, and Alan goes to meet him accompanied by his mother. His father is covered in blood from hunting and explains that he had taken down a massive boar. He then asks if his son would like to see it. The boy, full of excitement, responds positively. After saying their goodbyes, they head to the place where the animal is being cleaned. During the walk, Rodden points to some birds and explains that they were called albagarons. He comments that he chose the name Alan in honor of these creatures, since they could use their wings to fly freely anywhere in the world. Despite this, Derja had become very angry upon discovering that her son's name had been inspired by a monster. Upon arriving at the location, Alan is impressed by the size of the boar. Shortly afterward, Gerda appears. The man shows curiosity upon noticing that Alan had dark hair and eyes, something rare in that region. Alan greets Gerda, which surprises him, as he did not expect such a small child to be so sharp. He comments that his daughter, Krina, was the same age, but was far from showing that level of intelligence. Alan asks if the boar was truly strong. Gerda explains that it was a rank C monster and that at least 20 people were required to defeat it. 10 months pass until Alan finally reaches the second level of summoning. When he checks his statistics, he realizes that he is now capable of calling rank G creatures, and, in addition, his grimoire has unlocked a completely new ability, Summoning Fusion. Excited by the possibilities, he decides to test everything immediately, but soon notices that his MP is completely depleted. Without wasting time, he eats his meal as fast as he can, determined to return quickly to try something different. After recovering, Alan attempts to fuse 2 mice, but discovers that he still does not have enough MP, even with the bar completely full. Confused, he then tries to create a new summoning card, but the result is the same. Frustration takes over as he realizes that, at that moment, the new functions are still out of his reach. Time passes, and the scene shifts to when Alan has already turned 3 years old. His body is now stronger, his MP has increased considerably, and at last, he is able to use all the newly unlocked functions of the grimoire. Without hesitation, he fuses 2 rank G cards and obtains a bird of the same rank as a result. Satisfied, he decides to name it Chappie. The summoning is successful, and Alan feels thrilled as he watches his new companion take shape before him. Chappie possesses the ability to imitate voices, something Alan considers perfect for confusing and deceiving enemies in the future. Soon after, he summons the Frog Hopper and the Mole. Hopper has the ability to provoke opponents, which would be ideal for drawing enemy attention during battle. The Mole, called Molly, has the ability to dig, something perfect for preparing hidden traps in the terrain. While reflecting on the need to better master the abilities of his summons, Alan ends up getting distracted and falls into a hole freshly dug by Molly. The fall reminds him of an important reality. Despite his powers, he is still just a child and will not be facing real enemies anytime soon. When the 3 o'clock bell rings, his worries increase even more. A familiar voice echoes through the area, leaving him uneasy. It is Krita, Gerda's daughter, who has appeared to play warriors with him. Alan knows he cannot treat that confrontation lightly. Krita is extremely fast, and even after he has allocated all of his creature's bonuses into agility, he still has trouble keeping up with her. In the end, she wins the duel by breaking his sword. As evening falls, Alan's parents return home, and Derja's belly is already much bigger. Derja asks Krita to return home, explaining that it is already late. During dinner, Alan tells his father that he would like to accompany him to the farm to help with the harvest. Since his mother is pregnant and will not be able to work, Rodden immediately refuses the suggestion, and Derja agrees with him. Both acknowledge how much Alan has been helping with household chores, but emphasize that he is still very young and should only be concerned with playing. From Alan's point of view, he already has strength comparable to that of an adult and could contribute. Even so, he understands the reason for the refusal. After all, no parent would want to place their own child in such a heavy situation. Derja comments that she saw him throwing stones at a tree behind the house. Alan explains that he was training in case a monster appeared, so he could protect his mother. Deep down, he knows that this was not the real reason, since his true goal was to unlock a new ability. Rodden feels proud upon hearing that his son wants to protect Derja and comments that he can hardly wait to find out what Alan's abilities will be during the evaluation ceremony. Not understanding what that is about, Alan listens as Rodden explains. Upon turning 5 years old, every child participates in a ceremony in which they awaken a class. If they obtain a valuable class, there is a chance to leave behind the life of a servant. A few months pass, winter arrives, and Alan is now capable of maintaining a summon active for an entire day. Shortly afterward, Krina appears once again. As usual, she challenges him to a duel, and, once again, Alan ends up defeated. Rodden arrives home, and Derja goes to greet him. At that moment, Denka jumps onto her, causing her to be startled and fall. Derja says that everything is fine, but soon feels intense pain. Rodden asks Krina to go fetch her mother, as the baby is about to be born, and takes Derja to the bed. Meanwhile, Alan takes charge of boiling water. As soon as the water heats up, Krina returns accompanied by her mother, Matilda. She orders the men to leave the room, leaving only the women to help Derja during the childbirth. They wait outside for several hours. As dawn approaches, the cry of a baby finally echoes through the house. Alan now has a brother. Rodden decides to name him Mash, a name that Derja questions, asking whether it was inspired by a monster. Rodden responds only with a smile, confirming that she is right. Watching the joy stamped on everyone's faces, Alan begins to wonder what the reason for his reincarnation was, setting aside the fact that, in his past life, he was merely someone addicted to games who only thought about leveling up. He was nothing more than a lonely worker, trapped in routine and games. There is nothing from that life that he misses. In contrast, he deeply loves the idea of his new family. Even without knowing exactly how he will do it, Alan decides that he will do everything within his power to free his family from the life of servitude. Several years passed, and Alan continued walking alongside his father along one of the roads in the region. As they walked, he showed curiosity and wanted to know how the evaluation ceremony worked. Rodden then explained that it was a very important event, in which everyone had to participate upon turning 5 years old, from servants to nobles. He commented that if someone showed a valuable talent, that person could escape a life of servitude. However, he pointed out that there was a problem. The number of competitors was enormous. Alan found this observation strange and asked why his father thought that way. Rodden then explained that shortly after they settled in that land, families began having children non-stop. As a result, there were now many children about to turn 5 years old, including Alan. In the middle of the conversation, they heard Kreta's voice in the distance along with her father's. Upon noticing this, they decided to all go together. After walking for some more time, they spotted the commoners' village in the distance. When they arrived at the place where the ceremony would be held, Alan observed a large number of servants and commoners gathered. Soon after, the doors of the building opened. 3 members of the church appeared and began to bless everyone, invoking the name of Elmia, the god of creation. The church representatives wished everyone good luck and commented that the kingdom had already had heroes whose origins came directly from servitude. This statement surprised many commoners, who found it difficult to believe. To reinforce her words, the woman cited Clases, the saint, who was born a commoner, and Diverg, the sword lord, who was merely a servant. Upon hearing this, Alan recalled that in the game, classes such as hero and sword lord needed to emerge from lower social classes. Even knowing that this was part of the game's settings, he imagined that this logic also applied to that world. Because of this, he began to understand why everyone, without exception, had to go through the ceremony. The priests then asked everyone to enter. Inside the place, Alan carefully observed the statues of the gods worshipped there. The central statue represented Elmia, the god of creation, which made Alan remember the time when the developers had sent him a letter. Soon after, the evaluation ceremony began. The first to be called was the village chief, Deboji, accompanied by his son, Palomas. The priest asked the boy to place his hand on the crystal ball. As soon as he obeyed, his parameters appeared on a metal plate. The result revealed that he had talent to become a merchant. Deboji was extremely happy and ran to congratulate his son. One after another, the villagers were evaluated. Some showed no talent at all, while another boy manifested the talent of an axe user with a rank A attribute. After many tests, only Alan and Krina remained. The priests called Krina first. The girl ran to the front, visibly excited. The moment she placed her hand on the crystal ball, it began to shine with such intense brightness that it made everyone uneasy. However, the members of the church were delighted when they confirmed the result. Krina possessed the talent of Sword Lord, one of the most powerful classes in existence. The news threw the village into an uproar, as no one expected someone with such talent to appear in such a small place. The girl's father congratulated her with pride. Even so, Krina showed a certain frustration, as she would not become exactly a swordswoman, as she had wished. Alan, on the other hand, remained calm. He had already imagined that something like this would happen, considering the absurd strength she displayed. Without further delay, the priest called Alan. Inside, he felt anxious, believing that everyone would finally discover that he was a summoner. When he placed his hand on the crystal ball, it began to shine intensely, to the point of throwing Alan backward. Everyone around believed that this indicated an extraordinary talent. However, when approaching and asking about the result, the priest informed him, with some regret, that Alan had no talent at all. Alan refused to accept this answer. He approached again and observed his own parameters, realizing that all of them were classified as rank E. Irritated, he began to curse the developers in his mind, complaining that they did not know how to configure the game properly. To him, this was absurd, since no one would be able to perceive that he was a summoner. At that moment, Rodden approached his son and, without touching on the subject, said that it was time to return home, as his mother was waiting. When they arrived, they were received with joy by Derja and Alan's brother. Later, during dinner, his parents talked with him and stated that talents do not define a person's worth, reinforcing that Alan would always be a source of pride for them. Realizing how understanding his parents were, Alan felt grateful to have been born into that family. Then, everyone shared a warm embrace. Later, while everyone was sleeping, Alan began testing his grimoire. He reflected that, on that day, he had learned something important. He was the only one in that world playing on Inferno mode. Since everyone at the ceremony was 5 years old, that meant everyone should show rank E exactly like him. He concluded that the rank system probably indicated how much each person could evolve as they leveled up. Therefore, the reason all of his attributes were rank E must be linked to the fact that, in Inferno mode, his growth was only a fraction of the normal. In this way, the ranks were showing only a minimal part of his true potential. Alan thought that this would leave anyone desperate, but that was not his case. He believed he was in that world to put poorly made games in their proper place. Although, before that, he needed to make the developers fix that ridiculous game. Holding the grimoire, he decided to write a detailed complaint with everything he thought. The next day, Alan went out for a walk alongside his mother. During the stroll, he asked what was going on with his father, since he noticed him acting strangely. Derja explained that he had been like that since he came home late the previous night. Later, they head to Jurda's house, where they will celebrate Krina's talent. The girl speaks excitedly, saying that she discovered her talent is even better than that of a swordswoman. Alan shows surprise and asks if that is really true. Krina continues talking, stating that she will now become even stronger. At that moment, Matilda comments that the village chief stopped by her house and left a liquor for the celebration. Rodden seems pleased with the news, but remembering that he has been annoyed with that family lately, he merely congratulates them and wishes them to enjoy the drink. Jurda then points out that, in that house, guests always drink before the hosts. Noticing his father's behavior, Alan wonders if he might be feeling some kind of jealousy because of the talent issue. Soon after, he dismisses the idea, remembering that Rodden does not usually act that way. At that moment, he hears the two adults begin to argue. Rodden states that Krina's talent is impressive and that it deserves to be celebrated. In response, Jurda demands an explanation as to why he said that they would cut ties with her family. Rodden explains that this is not exactly what he wants, but he believes that since Krina will join the cavalry and serve the country, it would not be appropriate to waste time maintaining closeness with servants. Alan finally understands that his father is trying to do something he considers a favor, even though no one asked for it. Gerda grabs Rodden and comments that it is not something so serious. Rodden insists that it is indeed important. The argument between the two intensifies, making the atmosphere increasingly heavy. Alan asks Krina to try to calm them down. The girl grips her sword, ready to intervene, but before she can do anything, the wives step into the middle of the fight and resolve the situation firmly. With everything apparently settled, Krina goes back to eating normally. Alan then asks Matilda if those arguments are frequent. Matilda replies that they are, but comments that the arrival of the children helped the two become calmer, since in the past they used to resort to physical aggression. The mothers explain that the four adults have been friends since childhood and grew up in the same village. They recall that about 10 years ago, a rumor emerged that a new village would be built. Because of that, they decided to unite and participate together in this project, even discussing as a group the idea of working side by side to build their own houses. They ask if Alan never noticed that all the houses have practically the same shape. The boy replies that he had already noticed that. Rodden then comments that it was easier to build everything at the same time, dividing the tasks among everyone. On a new day, while the parents were busy with work, news arrives that the Order of Knights was looking for Krina. The villagers gather quickly. Among them also appears the boy who has the talent of an axe user. He provokes Alan, asking what someone without talent would be doing there, since people like that would have no place in such a situation. Upon hearing this, Krina gets irritated and tries to move toward him, but her father stops her before anything happens. Suddenly, the village chief announces that the Order of Knights has arrived. People move aside, opening a path. The axe boy is impressed when he realizes that the one who came was the captain himself, a master swordsman. The captain approaches the chief and directly asks for Krina, who is immediately called. Krina and her father step forward. The girl introduces herself enthusiastically before the captain. After observing her carefully, the captain orders her to take part in a duel. Gerda questions this decision, stating that Krina is only 5 years old and has never even wielded a real sword. The captain replies that, being a sword lady, this should not represent any problem. With a cold look, he asks whether they lied during the ceremony and whether someone dared to try to deceive Baron Granvelle. Then, Zenoff calls his vice-captain and orders him to prepare himself. Alan is confused by the situation. The captain then explains to Gerda that falsifying the results of the evaluation ceremony is a crime punishable by death. Therefore, it would be necessary to confirm whether the girl's talent is legitimate. Thus, the fencing duel is officially announced. Everyone around is shocked. Gerda begs for it not to happen. However, the captain makes it clear that if Krina refuses to fight, the entire family will be executed. The girl, in turn, shows no fear at all. Upon seeing a real sword, she becomes excited and tells her father that she will fight. Soon after, she positions herself in front of the vice-captain. Both introduce themselves. The vice-captain's name is Leibrand. Krina advances first, swinging her sword with force. Leibrand tries to counterattack, but Krina blocks the strike. When she almost manages to reach him, the vice-captain uses his feet and, with a kick, throws her against the wall. Gerda and the others become furious and demand that the fight be stopped. Even so, Krina gets up without hesitation and unleashes a special skill. With impressive speed and strength, she charges at Leibrand again. He can do nothing but defend himself until, in a moment of carelessness, Krina breaks his sword. The captain then declares the end of the duel. Krina regains her composure and comments that the fight ended far too quickly. Satisfied, she thanks the vice-captain for the match, while he falls to the ground, completely exhausted. Upon witnessing this scene, Gerda is moved and celebrates together with the soldiers. After seeing all of this, the captain has no more reason to doubt. He approaches Gerda, praises his upbringing, and states that he raised a true sword lady. He then apologizes for having doubted them and invites them to eat and talk about his daughter's future, also allowing them to bring their friends. Thus, everyone heads to the residence of the city chief. The atmosphere remains tense. Alan wonders why the axe boy and his father decided to follow them, but ends up setting that aside, taking advantage of the opportunity to take some fruits to his home. At that moment, the captain begins to speak, introduces himself as Zenoff, and explains that he was sent by order of his lord to confirm whether a true sword lord really existed there. With that visit, it becomes clear that everything was true. When addressing the village chief, the captain comments that, initially, that village located on the frontier would receive his name once it was fully established. However, now that it has been confirmed that a sword lord was born there, his lord decided that the place should be named in honor of this event, becoming known as Krina Village. The village chief does not question the decision and accepts it promptly. He then explains to the villagers the reason why he allowed Krina to be subjected to such a harsh trial. He tells them that 3 years earlier, a sword lord was born into a count's family and even came to serve the royal family. However, that person's performance fell far below expectations. After a new evaluation, they discovered that the supposed special talent was nothing more than a common swordsman talent. After that case, the kingdom realized that several members of the nobility had inflated or falsified their talents. For that reason, they decided to carefully review all the results of the evaluation ceremonies. Turning to Gerda, the captain apologizes once again for having placed his daughter in that situation. He asks Gerda to continue taking care of her and to help her develop, so that when she turns 12, she can study at the academy and, in the future, serve the royal family directly. Alan is surprised when he hears that. At that moment, the axe boy asks whether anyone could enter that academy and become a knight. The boy's father immediately scolds him, telling him to behave, and apologizes to the captain. Zenoff explains that, in the future, an instructor will be sent to the village and suggests that the boy devote himself to his studies in order to try to earn a place at the academy. Hearing this, Krina comments to Alan that he should study together with them as well. Alan replies that he intends to do so. The axe boy, however, reacts with laughter, saying that Alan would not have sufficient ability. Krina immediately steps forward to defend him. Alan, in turn, reacts with complete indifference, since in his mind, he is nothing more than a 40-year-old adult living in that body. The captain then carefully observes Alan's dark hair and eyes and asks who he is. Rodden replies that he is his son, and Gerda reinforces the introduction. Upon hearing Rodden's name, the captain shows surprise and asks if he is the same Rodden known as the boar hunter. He then stands up and apologizes for having been so rude to someone considered a legend in that village. Rodden becomes confused and asks what he is talking about. The captain explains that the Baron greatly appreciates the boar meat sent by the village every winter. According to what he has heard, Rodden is the one who always takes on the most dangerous part of the hunts, being seen by many as a true local hero. The captain asks Rodden to accept that as a compliment, both from the Baron and from himself. Hearing all of this, Alan cannot help but think that his father is someone truly impressive. Later, while they were returning home, Rodden shares an important lesson with his son. Even though they are only servants, they can still be recognized by important people. He asks Alan to never give up and to keep moving forward, no matter how difficult the work may be. Alan comments that his father was recognized by someone important. He also mentions that he picked some fruits to take to his mother and his brother, asking if that had been wrong. Rodden simply laughs at the question, showing that he did the same and even took a larger amount. Some time passes, and Alan is visibly excited, as he has finally managed to reach level 3 in summoning. He opens the grimoire carefully and realizes that he now possesses the enhancement skill, capable of strengthening his summons, in addition to having unlocked rank F summons. While analyzing this, he begins to reflect on what might happen if he tried to fuse his summons at this new stage, imagining whether something grand, like a dragon, could emerge. Even though he is curious, he decides to leave these tests for another time. That same night, Alan has dinner together with his family. During the meal, it becomes clear that Derja is expecting another child. Upon feeling the baby's light movements, Alan comments that he believes it might be a girl. Rodden begins to think about possible names, but Derja reminds him that they had both agreed that, if it were a girl, she would be responsible for choosing the name. At that exact moment, the system alerts Alan that his MP is completely full. Without realizing it, Alan ends up mentally reading the creator's name, Elmia. His parents quickly scold him, explaining that one should not mention the name of a god carelessly. Derja then asks what is going on with him. since his behavior has been strange throughout the entire day. To avoid the subject, Alan shifts the focus of the conversation and asks his father about his arm, noting that the old scar had disappeared. Rawdon explains that this happened because he went through the trial of the gods during the boar hunt carried out earlier. According to him, it is a special moment in which an intense wave of energy runs through the body, healing wounds and eliminating accumulated fatigue. Upon hearing this, Alan understands that it referred to leveling up. He acknowledges that his father is experienced in boar hunting and, even without being able to visualize his statistics, he is sure that Rawdon must already be at a fairly high level. Despite his summoning ability having evolved, Alan knows that he is still only at overall level 1, and that the only way to gain experience is by defeating monsters. However, servants cannot leave the village without authorization, except when they participate in hunts. With this in mind, Alan expresses out loud his desire to participate in a hunt. Rawdon responds firmly, making it clear that this is not a game, and that such a decision can put lives at risk. After hearing his father's answer, Alan walks away in silence, thinking only about how much he wants to become stronger. Later, Alan decides to check the message sent by the developers. In it, they explain that the error in the text was corrected and that the reason all of his statistics appeared as rank E is related to the difficulty mode he chose in the game. In addition, they sent a file containing the raw data of his statistics. Upon analyzing them, Alan discovers that he has an S ranking in MP and intelligence, while the other attributes are at the same level as Krina's. This leaves him satisfied, as he realizes that all the effort he has put in so far has not been in vain. Without wasting time, he decides to test the enhancement skill on Denka. As a result, Denka receives an increase in agility and endurance. Excited, Alan decides to summon him to see him in person, noticing that his appearance has changed a little. This excites him, but his excitement does not last long, as his mother suddenly appears and, startled, ends up stepping on Denka. The next day, Rawdon says goodbye to go out on another hunt. Alan, on the other hand, keeps thinking about what he could do throughout the day. After hanging out the clothes, he begins trying new combinations of creatures, but none of them result in an unprecedented summoning card. Then, a different idea emerges, combining an insect with a bird. From this attempt, a new herb-type card of rank F is born. At first, this leaves him a little disappointed. However, when analyzing the characteristics of the new summon, he realizes that it has an MP bonus. This buff is extremely useful to him, as it will allow him to carry out many more activities in a single day. Even knowing that leveling up can take decades, he remains optimistic and decides to summon it. Thus, a little creature with an appearance similar to an apple appears. Alan decides to call it a Poe. Next, he starts to wonder what ability that summon possessed. At that moment, a Poe reveals its status, and Alan discovers that its ability is called Aroma. Without fully understanding what that means, he asks a Poe to use it. A Poe then buries itself in the ground and makes a small plant sprout. When he senses the smell that spreads, Alan notices an aroma similar to that of essential oil. At that moment, his mother approaches and thanks him for taking care of the clothes. Alan asks a Poe to return to card form, but the creature does not obey. Derja notices the sprout on the ground and seems a little surprised, but upon sensing the pleasant aroma, she ends up not giving it much importance. Later, Alan begins to train with Krina. As usual, he ends up being defeated. Even so, the girl comments that he has been getting stronger in recent times. This surprises Alan. When reviewing his statistics, he realizes that both his sword skill and his endurance have increased. He begins to wonder whether a Poe's aroma ability might have some effect in combat, or if it influences things in some other way. At that moment, Alan also remembers that Fido, his wolf summon, has an ability called Bite. He thinks about testing it on someone, but soon concludes that it would not be a good idea to try that with Krina. The girl notices his distraction and asks if something is wrong. Alan replies that it is nothing. After that, he begins training by throwing stones at the trunk of a tree. Mash, who was nearby, comments that it looks boring. Alan asks him to wait a little. Meanwhile, he thinks that he now has many more responsibilities, since he needs to take care of his younger sibling and help his mother, who is pregnant, with household chores. He even considers abandoning the stone throwing training. But he does not want to give up, as he feels that he is very close to leveling up. When he was about to throw another stone, his brother asks about the trees that are growing near the house. Alan realizes that Apo has practically created a small garden around the place. He explains that Apo's aroma ability reduced the MP recovery time from 6 hours to 5. Later, during the night, Alan begins to show concern, as his father still has not returned. Derja also finds the situation strange, since Rodden had said he would hunt near the village. Shortly after, they both hear distant shouts, urging Rodden to hold on. Without wasting time, everyone goes out to see what is happening and soon discovers that Rodden has been seriously injured, being carried by the other hunters. Already inside the house, Gerda explains that Rodden's abdomen was pierced by a boar's tusk. Alan notices that the wound was cauterized, with no apparent bleeding. Gerda then clarifies that they only managed to keep him alive thanks to the use of an extremely rare medicinal herb, the Mueller's flower. Derja, surprised, asks how they managed to obtain something so valuable, and Gerda says that she bought the herb using the money the knights gave as an apology for the test applied to Krina. One of the hunters claims that all of this happened because of a commoner. The others agree with him and begin to suggest that they should go complain. In the middle of the commotion, Mash wakes up and, upon seeing his father in that state, begins to cry desperately. Alan picks him up and carries him away to calm him down. Shortly after, the others decide to leave and let them be alone. Taking advantage of the moment when there is no one else around, Alan asks Gerda what really happened and why they were blaming the commoners. Gerda explains that, a few days earlier, everyone had been summoned by the village chief, who requested authorization for the commoners to participate in the boar hunt. Alan asks the reason for this, and Gerda explains that boar meat has great value. Although most of it goes to the Baron, the remainder is divided among the hunters, who usually trade this meat for salt, firewood, and other essential daily items. However, bringing down a boar is not a simple task, and for that reason commoners rarely volunteer to participate in the hunts. Even so, a rumor arose that there was a hero among the servants. For a moment, Alan believes they were talking about Krina. However, Gerda clarifies that the comment was about Rodden. He remembers that Captain Zinnoff had already referred to Rodden as a legend, and that over time this ended up being treated almost like an official title. In this way, everyone came to believe that the commoners would be safe during the hunt as long as Rodden was present. Both Gerda and Rodden did not feel comfortable with this decision, but they had no way to oppose the village chief's order. Because of that, they ended up accepting it. During the training sessions, most of the commoners refused to truly participate. When the day of the hunt arrived, they were given the task considered the simplest, drawing the boar's attention. However, fear got the better of them, and they abandoned their positions. As a result, Rodden ended up getting injured while trying to protect one of them. Gerda comments that, fortunately, they managed to defeat the boar in the end, and that the next day she would bring the portion of meat that would belong to Rodden. Before leaving, she asks Alan and Derja to stay strong and move forward. Alan and his mother spend the entire night tending to Rodden's injuries. When he finally wakes up, relief takes over everyone. Seeing his father in that state makes Alan feel deeply guilty, as he realizes that he had been treating this new life merely as a game, while the people of that world struggled every day to survive. Shortly after, Gerda returns bringing the meat. Rodden apologizes, saying that he ended up becoming a burden to the family. Alan, with a determined expression, asks them not to worry about it and states that he will take care of everyone. Early in the morning, he goes to fetch water from the well. Despite the adults' warning that it is too heavy, Alan carries the buckets without showing any difficulty, surprising everyone with his strength. Back at home, Alan comments that he decided to invest all of his bonus points into physical attributes, giving up MP points because his family came first. Next, he accompanies Gerda to harvest potatoes and pulls them out of the ground with ease, leaving him quite impressed. Upon finishing the work, Alan complains about how little he receives and, at that moment, begins to understand just how difficult a servant's life is. Later, the village chief appears accompanied by a commoner, bringing some fruit and wishing Rodden a speedy recovery. The commoner steps forward, apologizes, and shows remorse for what happened. Rodin forgives him, but Therja does not accept it so easily, reminding them that the mistake almost cost her husband's life. Next, other servants also arrive bringing gifts. Alan, moved, thinks that he truly has the best parents he could ever wish for. After that, Alan goes to a field and clears part of the land. Then, he summons several frogs and sets up some traps. He then asks the frogs to use the provoke ability, hoping to attract wild birds or even ducks. But nothing appears. When he was about to give up, a huge bird appears in Albagarens, a rank B beast. The creature immediately begins to eliminate his summons. Alan tries to flee, but the system informs him that he has just reached level 2 simply because his frogs had faced the monster. Realizing this, he decides to fight. Picking up a stone, he uses all the throwing practice he has been doing to strike the bird's head. Then, he charges in with his sword, but even so, he cannot defeat the creature. He then summons the canine patrol, which attacks using their bite abilities, but it is still not enough. The Albagarens knocks him to the ground, and Alan realizes that his strength is decreasing rapidly, since he loses his buffs whenever one of his summons is defeated. Exhausted, he falls to the ground, trying only to avoid being devoured. Alan summons some larvae, which quickly latch onto the monster's neck and begin draining its energy. With that, he manages to free himself and, without wasting time, calls his hunting dogs along with even more larvae. In this way, Alan ends the fight by delivering a sword strike to the Albagaren's head. Soon after, the grimoire appears, informing him that he defeated an Albagaren and received 100 experience points. Alan celebrates, thinking that it was more rewarding than he had imagined. Next, he returns to his family, bringing the bird with him, but makes up a story, saying that he defeated the monster by catching it off guard. Everyone is impressed. His father asks if he was hurt, and Alan replies that he is fine. Gerda shows surprise upon learning that he defeated that monster using only a wooden sword and a few stones, but soon notices bite marks on the bird and asks if Alan bit it. The boy says he is not sure, as he was fighting driven only by survival instinct. Gerda accepts the explanation without questioning it and tells Rodin that she will be responsible for bleeding the bird. Alan notices the bump on Gerda's head and imagines that Krina hit him while they were playing knights. After that, Gerda takes Alan to help him deal with the Albagaren and explains that, of the 60 kilograms the bird has, after the blood is drained only 20 kilograms remain. Even so, only half of that can be consumed. The wings, however, have great value. Alan is very happy that Gerda is willing to teach him all of that. Gerda continues explaining that 60% of the beast will still be allocated to the upper class. It is a shame, but this rule also applies to wild monsters, with the exception of rank E ones, such as horned rabbits. Soon after, Gerda removes the magic stone from the beast's body. He comments that magic stones above rank D are subject to taxation, but that would not be a problem, since those stones would have no use for them. Gerda also explains that a boy like Alan would only be hunting monsters of that type because his father is injured. For that reason, he intends to use this as an argument to negotiate a larger share with the village chief. Upon hearing this, Alan gets an idea and shares it with Gerda. The scene then shifts to the village chief's house. They take the beast there and explain that Alan risked his own life to hunt the bird since his father could not do it. This moves Deboji. Gerda asks if they can keep the beast, but Deboji replies that they cannot, as the Baron has been demanding more and more meat. Hearing this, Alan deduces that this must be the reason why the commoners were authorized to participate in the hunt. In response, Gerda proposes handing over the wings and the magic stone, but Deboji still does not seem satisfied. Then Gerda explains the difficult situation that Rodin's family is going through. Alan also joins the conversation, saying that he is very hungry and pretending to almost faint. With that, they manage to convince Deboji to allow them to keep the bird. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Alan asks if he can keep all the birds he hunts, as long as he always hands over the wings and the magic stone to Deboji. Gerda realizes the boy's intention and comments that it is dangerous for a child to continue hunting monsters. Hearing this, Deboji concludes that it would be difficult for a child to defeat an Albageran frequently, and thus authorizes them to keep the meat. With the situation resolved, Alan returns to the field to hunt more Albagerans. Using the same strategy, he manages to lure 2 birds and defeats them in the same way as the previous one. Alan comments that he usually hunts once every 3 days, and that this was the first time he did not lose any summons. The grimoire then informs him that he received 200 experience points, reaching the total necessary to advance to level 2. Alan immediately opens his status window and realizes that his statistics have increased, although only 60% due to the Inferno difficulty. Even so, he is very happy, especially since it took him 6 years to finally level up. Upon returning home, he shows the hunts to his father. Rodden is surprised, especially when Alan comments that he defeated the 2 birds at the same time. Rodden notices something strange, but prefers not to say anything. Soon after, Alan hears the bells and understands that it is already time to play knights with Krina. During the play, Alan shows himself to be much more agile, dodging and blocking attacks with ease. While fighting, he thinks that he needs to dry the birds' meat for the winter and then trade part of it for firewood. He also considers taking advantage of the presence of the Albagerans to hunt 20 more and reach level 3, even knowing that it would be difficult to do so before the end of the year. Because he is distracted, Krina finds an opening and lands a blow on his head. At the end of the fight, the girl says goodbye, saying that she will return another day. Later, that night, Alan decides to tell his parents something important. He reveals that, when he was 1 year old, he received a divine oracle. As expected, his parents are shocked. His father asks if it was the god Amiya, and Alan confirms, repeating the words he heard, that he would receive wisdom and strength. Derja does not quite understand, so Alan explains that, apparently, he is more intelligent than others and a little stronger physically. In addition, he would face trials that not even 100 men could overcome. Upon hearing this, his parents are frightened, and Derja begs God for mercy. Rodden comments that day, Alan must have overcome one of those trials, since he noticed that the scar on his face had disappeared. Alan is surprised that he noticed this, and Rodden explains that he knows very well what the trials of the gods are like. Confused, his mother asks about the ritual of the evaluation ceremony from the previous year. Alan replies that he received an oracle from Elmia 2 months ago explaining that, according to the oracle, his characteristics were evaluated as low due to the slow progress of his tests. In addition, the reason no talent appeared is because his talent is something completely new. Rodden shows interest and asks what this talent is, but Alan replies that he still does not know. In his thoughts, he apologizes to his father, since telling the truth now could lead some people to draw the wrong conclusions upon discovering that he can summon and control creatures. At that moment, his mother approaches and hugs him, quite worried about not knowing how much he had been striving to overcome Elmia's trials. His father asks what he intends to do from now on. Alan replies that he will continue striving to pass all the tests. Rodden already expected that answer and asks him not to hesitate to ask for help if he needs it. He also asks Alan not to tell anyone else about this, as they might think he is a false prophet, commenting that he will only allow Gerda to know, since he is always boasting about his daughter being a sword lord. Alan agrees, saying that he can tell Gerda. The scene moves to winter. During this period, Alan was already 6 years old and was busy cutting the Albageran meat. While watching the boy work, Gerda comments that he always knew Alan was not an ordinary child, but never imagined that he had been blessed and put to the test by a god. After that, the two head to the city. On the way, Gerda asks if this is Alan's first time negotiating supplies. Alan confirms that it is. Gerda then comments that it was a great decision for him to have stored the Albageran meat. Alan takes the opportunity to praise Gerda, saying that he managed to get a large amount of boar meat. Gerda replies that, since the commoners stopped participating in the hunts, everything has been working better. Hearing this, Alan asks what exactly the difference was between them and the commoners. Gerda explains that the main difference was social status and taxes. Since the commoners did not pay 60% in taxes like they did, Instead, every year the commoners had to pay 3 gold coins per adult and 1 per child. This information catches Alan's attention, and he soon asks if there was any way to become a commoner. Gerda replies that this was possible by paying 10 gold coins per family member, but that it could also be granted as a direct reward from the Baron. Alan does the calculations mentally and comes to the conclusion that, for his family to achieve that status, 50 gold coins would be necessary, especially considering that there was a new member about to be born. Shortly after, they arrive at a shop and trade part of the meat for salt. Then they visit a fruit shop. Over time, Alan begins to frequent the market on his own. Everything he learns during these visits he carefully records in his grimoire. In this way, he discovers that 1 gold coin is equivalent to 100 silver, that 1,000 copper coins correspond to 10,000 iron. From this, he concludes that, to gather 50 gold coins, it would be necessary to hunt 500 albigarons. Even thinking the number is excessive, he considers it acceptable, since he has always been used to playing on the hardest mode. Soon after, Alan enters a potion shop and asks if there is any potion capable of recovering MP. The merchant replies that he does not deal with that kind of sophisticated potion. Then Alan asks if there is anything that can heal wounds, and the seller points to some plants displayed in the place. Alan approaches them and draws them in his grimoire. Driven by curiosity, he asks which of those plants is the Mueller's flower. The seller replies that he does not have any, and that, even if he did, he would not give any discount, commenting that he was still frustrated with the last one he sold. That flower had been sold precisely to Gerda about a month earlier. The seller explains that Gerda was extremely insistent. The flower cost 5 gold coins, but he even went so far as to beg on his knees for it to be sold for 3 coins, claiming that he needed to save a friend. Faced with such insistence, he ended up giving in. Even so, for him, it had been a terrible deal, since he lost 2 gold coins. Upon learning that Gerda did that because of his father, Alan hands the seller a package of albigaran meat and explains that that flower was responsible for saving his father's life. Alan also comments that, when he came back next time, he would bring even more meat for the merchant. As he leaves the shop, Alan notices a shelf where there was a weapon for sale for 50 silver coins. At that moment, Dagora, who was accompanied by the village chief's son, asks aggressively what Alan wanted in his family's shop. Alan ignores the provocation and moves on, but Dagora pushes him and demands that he become his lackey. Alan gets irritated, but thinks that PvP did not yield experience, so it was not worth it. Even so, he draws his sword just to intimidate him, challenging the boy who wielded the axe to a duel. Dagora accepts the challenge and goes to fetch his weapon, asking Palomas to keep an eye on Alan to make sure he does not run away. When he returns, he charges forward holding a club. Alan acknowledges that Dagora was strong, but in his mind he judges that it was nowhere near Krina's level. With ease, Alan manages to disarm him and ends the fight quickly. Before leaving, he tells Dagora that one day he would return to do business at that shop. Later, already at home, Rodin begins removing the bandages, boasting that he was completely recovered. Derja asks him to be careful, warning that she did not want to see him injured again. The next day, Alan goes to Krina's house. There, he trains with Dagora, while Krina practices with her younger brother. During the training, Alan notices that she is taking it easy on her brother. At a certain moment, Dagora tries to attack Alan by surprise, but he manages to dodge without difficulty. At the end of the training, everyone returns to their homes. Later, during the night, Alan remains silent, watching his mother as she puts his little sister, Mila, to sleep. At that moment, Rodin and Gerda arrive. Rodin comments that the village chief had summoned them and decided to increase the hunting quota from 10 to 15 boars. This meant that, from now on, the commoners would also be required to participate. Derja shows that she does not like the idea at all, but Rodin clarifies that these were direct orders from the Baron. Gerda adds something even more worrying. If the quota were not met, new servants would be recruited. Alan quickly understands the scale of the problem. With more servants, there would be less land available for each family, and some might even lose their land, especially those that did not contribute to the hunt. In addition, Gerda warns that the following year the quota would rise to 20 boars. Verja considers this absurd, thinking that doubling the number of boars meant doubling the risk. Even so, Rodden insists that the Lord of the Lands did not care about the servants' opinions. Alan comments that, even if they managed to meet the quota, the Baron would probably increase the number again in the following years, until it became impossible, resulting in the need to recruit even more servants. For that reason, he suggests that the participation of the commoners would be indispensable. Gerda completely opposes the idea, saying that she did not want to take dead weight along. Alan replies that, if they were useless, all that was needed was to make them useful. In his mind, he recalls the experience he gained playing various games on hard difficulty, knowing exactly how to integrate someone with no experience into a group and allow them to grow safely. He states that he possesses the wisdom granted by the god Elmia and asks that they leave this matter in his hands. The scene then changes to Alan, Rodden, and Gerda arriving at the place where they would meet with the group of commoners. Rodden makes it clear that, this time, the hunt would follow the plan created by Alan. Although Alan would only be observing everything from the outside, he had decided to help train the novices because he did not want anyone else to end up getting hurt like his father had in the past. The group then leaves the city, and Alan feels excited, since it was the first time he had left the village. As he walked, he observed the White Dragon Mountain Range, a place shrouded in stories and legends, where it is said that the legendary White Dragon lives, a beast known for its absurd strength. Upon arriving at the hunting grounds, Rodden orders everyone to take their positions. It does not take long before two servants manage to lure a boar. Gerda's group positions itself at the front, holding back the creature's advance with their spears, while Rodden's group advances along the flanks. At that moment, Alan orders the commoners to take action. This way, they are also able to participate in the hunt and gain experience, leveling up. Everyone is surprised by the sensation caused by the divine trial, something completely new to them. Just as Alan had predicted, the plan worked perfectly, allowing the commoners to evolve. Even so, he notices, with a certain frustration, that he did not gain any experience simply by commanding the attack. The next morning, while Alan was drawing water from the well, he was talking with some servants. One of them comments that his wife was pregnant and says that he felt grateful, since he now had plenty of work cleaning boars. Upon hearing this, Alan gets an idea and invites him to go to his house. Once there, Alan proposes that the servant be responsible for butchering the Albageran, offering 2 meat potions for each one that was prepared. The servant gets excited about the proposal and accepts immediately. Meanwhile, Alan thinks to himself that those Albageran would not be used for personal consumption, but rather for sale at the butcher shop. After all, in order to turn his family into commoners, he needed to gather 50 gold coins. Later, Alan sets out on another hunt. This time, 4 commoners are part of the group. He reflects that if they continued gradually increasing the number of commoners, it would soon be possible to divide the team into 2 groups, which would make the hunts much more efficient. Just like before, the boar is lured in. Gerda's group holds the attack from the front, while Rodden's group advances from the sides. Finally, the commoners take action, delivering blows to secure experience. This time, however, Alan also gains experience and levels up to level 3. Shortly before, he had summoned the grasshopper Denka, who ended up being trampled by the boar. Even so, Alan receives experience for having contributed to the fight. 3 months pass, and Alan returns with Krina from the village chief's house, where they had gone to celebrate the new year. Upon arriving at Gerda's house, Rodden asks how the visit had been. Alan replies that it was good, but comments that it would have been even better if Gerda and his father had gone as well. Gerda responds that she prefers to celebrate at home. While they were eating, he asks whether the village chief had thanked them for the group reaching the goal of 15 boars. Alan confirms, and Rodden adds that if they kept going like that, they would even reach the goal of 20 boars that same year, all thanks to his son's plan to train the commoners. After a while, Gerda draws attention to a bottle behind Alan. He explains that it was a wine he had received as a gift from the village chief. Noticing his interest, Alan changes the subject, pretending not to notice. Even so, Gerda and her father insist, reminding him that children cannot drink. Then, Alan says that he can hand over the wine, but only if they managed to defeat him in a competition. Otherwise, if he won, he wanted to take part in the next boar hunt. Rodden accepts the challenge, and Alan announces that the contest would be an arm wrestling match. Gerda is the first to compete. Alan thinks to himself that he was already at level 6 and had concentrated all of his reinforcements on strength. Because of that, he defeats Gerda without any difficulty. However, when it is time to face Rodden, Alan ends up being defeated. While they were drinking, Alan reflects that Gerda must be around rank D, while her father seemed to be at rank C. He becomes visibly discouraged, but Rodden notices and says that he did not need to be sad, stating that Alan was not weak. Rodden also promises that when Alan managed to defeat him, he would allow him to participate in the hunt. Alan feels encouraged by this promise, since he believes that upon reaching level 4 in summoning, he would probably be able to defeat his father. Some time later, when Alan had already turned 7 years old, his summoning finally reaches level 4. With that, he gains the ability to summon rank E creatures. However, since this is a new type of summoning, he understands that he first needs to synthesize these creatures. In addition, another function ends up being unlocked at the same time: storage. Curious, Alan tests this new feature and quickly learns how to use the storage space. Even so, he finds it strange that this function has appeared now, since, in games, this type of feature usually only appears when it truly becomes necessary. Later, he begins trying to generate rank E insects, but nothing happens. At that moment, the grimoire manifests and explains that, to create insects of that level, rank E magic stones are required. Alan pauses for a moment and remembers that he has some of those stones stored away. Being careful not to make any noise, he enters the house without waking his sister and takes the magic stones that he had hidden together with the coins he had been saving. He tries once again to perform the insect summoning, but still does not succeed. Thinking of another possibility, he decides to place the crystal inside the item box. This time, the result is different. A butterfly is summoned. To his surprise, it is considerably larger than the other creatures he had summoned up until then. The scene changes, and Alan finds himself face to face with a saber-toothed tiger, which is also part of his rank E summons. He tries to create new cards by fusing the butterfly with the tiger, but the attempt fails. Then, he remembers the item box once again and decides to place the crystals there before trying one more time. This way, he manages to create a bird. Later, during the night, Alan talks with his father and asks about the horned rabbits. His father replies that he no longer needed to worry about those creatures, since they had dug trenches around the village, preventing the rabbits from getting close. Upon hearing this, Alan is not pleased at all with the news, feeling a discomfort that he cannot quite explain. The next morning, while they are training together, Alan asks Palomas about the magic stones. Palomas explains that these stones are located near the hearts of magical beasts and are usually used as a power source for magical tools. He also comments that rank D or C magic stones are highly valued in the royal capital, while rank E ones are seen as something worthless, to the point that they are often found discarded on the ground. The following day, Alan had already gathered a large number of magic stones, as he asked the villagers for help in looking for them. Thanks to this, he manages to generate all the rank E cards. At that moment, a strong gust of wind ends up carrying away one of his cards, which causes his bird to be summoned suddenly. The creature immediately conveys a warning of danger. A boar appears charging at full force and ends up knocking Alan to the ground. Before something worse can happen, one of his cards activates a healing ability, restoring his injuries. The boar charges again, but the butterfly releases a stunning powder, creating an opening for the tiger to attack and finish off the creature. Soon after, a second boar appears, but Alan uses his defense card and manages to defeat it. Then, everything returns to normal, and Alan realizes that he had only imagined that entire situation. Throughout all the time he has spent in this game, he has reflected countless times on the true role of a summoner and on how to fight in the best possible way to draw out the maximum potential of this class's abilities. Now, he clearly understands that each summoned creature has a well-defined function. Insect-type creatures are responsible for weakening enemies. Beast-type creatures handle direct attacks. Bird-type creatures are used to gather information and transmit messages. Plant-type creatures are focused on healing. Stone-type creatures, on the other hand, have the function of defense. With this combination, Alan realizes that he can carry out tasks that would normally require an entire group. For him, this is the true meaning of being a summoner. Regardless of the situation, it is about commanding a force capable of advancing without stopping and facing any opponent. This is the power of a summoner who can, one day, surpass even the Demon King. The scene shifts to Deboji's house. Jirda wants to know why everyone has been summoned there. Deboji then explains that the Baron will be visiting the village next month. The news completely catches Jirda and Rodden off guard. Deboji adds that the Baron has expressed curiosity about seeing firsthand how the wild boar hunt is carried out. Rodden does not see any problem with that, but he finds it strange that his son has also been included in the summons. The village chief explains that someone will need to accompany the Baron as his guide during his stay, and he intends for Alan to take on that role. At first, the boy shows no interest whatsoever. However, after giving it more thought, he remembers that, besides paying to obtain the status of a commoner, it is also possible to receive that title directly from the Baron himself. Considering that it would take around 10 years of hunting wild boars and albigarons to achieve that status through ordinary means, Alan ultimately decides to accept. A few days later, Baron Granvelle arrives at the village, accompanied by his guards and his daughter, Cecil. Once inside the village chief's house, the Baron expresses his gratitude for the many years Deboji has devoted to the foundation and growth of Krina village. He comments that 15 years have passed since the land reclamation decree and that no other settlement within the Granvelle fief has achieved results as remarkable as this one. He then apologizes for requesting such a large amount of wild boar meat. He acknowledges that it must have placed an enormous burden on the village, but explains that he had no choice, as it was a direct order from the king. Upon hearing this, Deboji is both shocked and uneasy. The Baron then adds that the person truly responsible for the situation was Viscount Carnal, who happened to bring up the wild boar hunt while speaking with the king. After calming down, the Baron begins eating and is genuinely delighted by the flavor of the meat. Cecil is also pleasantly surprised. Curious, he asks what kind of meat is being served, but Deboji does not know the answer. At that moment, Alan politely speaks up, explaining that it is albigaran meat, hunted the previous day and prepared with fresh herbs to enhance its flavor. Granvelle is impressed and asks whether Alan is Deboji's son. The village chief replies that he is not, explaining that the boy is Rodden's son. Upon hearing that, Zenoff remembers him, and Alan says it is an honor to see him again, adding that he will be responsible for guiding them during the hunt the following day. The Baron remarks that Alan appears to be very well-mannered and asks whether his father used to be a knight. Deboji replies that he was not, explaining that Alan comes from a family of serfs. Cecil immediately reacts, questioning how Deboji could allow a serf to enter the hall. Her father, however, scolds her, reminding her that serfs are also legitimate members of the fief. Faced with this, Cecil apologizes, but she ends up harboring resentment toward Alan, believing she was reprimanded because of him. Zenoff states that he expects Alan to be prepared to explain every detail of the hunt the next day. He comments that it is extremely difficult to capture 20 wild boars in a single year, and that, if the task proves too difficult, one of his knights will take over. The Baron adds that, after Alan demonstrates the basics, the knights can take the lead in the hunt. Alan, however, says that will not be necessary, as 20 wild boars represent only a small number for them, assuring everyone that they will have no difficulty at all. He believes the team's performance the following day will be enough to prove it. The following morning, Alan leads the Baron to the location where the wild boar hunt takes place. Upon arriving, he suggests that they climb a tower, from which they will be able to observe the entire operation. Shortly afterward, the hunting party appears. The Baron finds it strange that some of the members are wearing armor. Alan explains that the armor was made from leftover hides, bones, and tusks taken from the wild boars themselves. 3 serfs move into the forest. Alan continues explaining that their role is to lure the wild boars toward the hunting ground. Speed is essential for this task, so they wear light equipment. At that moment, Zinoff asks how Krina's swordmaster is doing these days. Alan replies that she has been improving steadily. Zinoff tells him to inform her that a tutor will be sent to the village in the spring to help prepare her for the academy entrance examination. Alan imagines Krina studying, but his thoughts are interrupted by the heavy sound of a wild boar approaching. One of the serfs leads the animal into the hunting ground, allowing two others to restrict its movements with large shields. Soon afterward, the attack team moves into action. As everything unfolds, Alan explains each step to the Baron. At the final moment, Rawdon delivers the decisive blow to the wild boar's neck. Cecil cannot bear the sight and ends up fainting. Once everything is over, Zinoff acknowledges that the method being used is impressive, commenting that, even though they are not knights, they deserve to be called warriors. The Baron fully agrees. Immediately afterward, the other two serfs lure in two more wild boars. Zinoff orders Leibrand to prepare to intervene, but Alan stops him, stating that the team has been trained to handle this type of situation. Just as before, they separate the wild boars, immobilize each one with the shields, and the attackers finish the job. Alan comments that 3 wild boars have been successfully taken down and feels relieved to see that everything has gone according to plan. The Baron observes that 17 wild boars are still needed to complete the quota. Alan corrects him, explaining that only 10 remain, since 7 had already been hunted before the Baron arrived at the village. He believes the quota will be completely fulfilled by the following month. The Baron is visibly impressed. Afterward, Alan says he would like to make 2 requests. The first is permission to build 2 more shield walls, already planning for an even greater number of hunts the following year. The second request involves permission to obtain items that do not exist in the village, specifically beverages. He explains that, with the constant increase in hunting, meat becomes abundant, which could lower its local value. Trading part of that meat for beverages brought in from outside would help maintain market balance. Zinoff immediately understands that Alan's intention is also to keep the hunters' morale high. With that in mind, the Baron agrees to both requests. Finally, he praises Alan, acknowledging that the work carried out that day was excellent. Before they return to the village, Cecil warns Alan not to let her father's praise go to his head. As she walks away, Alan thinks that he hopes she returns to her comfortable life in the city soon, believing that this was probably the last time they would ever meet. The narrative shifts to Deboji's house, where Rawdon, Gerda, and Alan have been summoned for a meeting with the Baron. Granvelle makes a point of publicly recognizing everything Rawdon and Gerda have accomplished over the years and, as a reward, announces that the status of their families will be elevated to that of commoners. Everything happens exactly as Alan had predicted in his plans. Rawdon and Gerda are completely surprised by the decision, taking a few moments to believe it, but they soon express their gratitude to the Baron. Alan is also pleased, as he will now have permission to hunt outside the village's boundaries. In his thoughts, he already imagines himself heading first to the White Dragon Mountains with the intention of hunting dragons. The Baron continues by explaining that any serf who has participated in the hunts for more than 10 years will also receive the same recognition. The responsibility for deciding which serfs meet those criteria will be left to Rawdon and Gerda. At that moment, Sebas draws Granvelle's attention to a request made by the king. In response, the Baron informs everyone that His Majesty wishes to make Krina village an example for the entire kingdom. For that reason, he has requested details about how the wild boar hunts first began. Gerda comments that the subject is a sensitive one for Rawdon and explains that he will be the one to tell the story. Gerda begins by recounting that it all started in the spring 13 years earlier, when around 100 serfs from neighboring villages moved to that region to help develop the land under the Land Reclamation Decree. After 6 months of intense work, a large portion of the forest had already been cleared. However, at that point, a massive wild boar appeared and attacked the group. The creature devoured most of the food supplies that had been set aside to survive the winter. Despair spread among everyone, as without enough food, no one believed they would be able to survive the cold season. That was when Rawdon stepped forward and proposed hunting the wild boar. Despite having no proper preparation and almost no weapons, all the serfs decided to unite. Against all expectations, they managed to defeat the creature. Those who were injured recovered after undergoing God's trial, but one of their companions was not as fortunate and ended up losing his life. Rodden has carried that burden ever since. Even though Gerda insists that it was not his fault, Rodden continues to blame himself for what happened, making the subject especially painful for him. Alan realizes that it was precisely this experience that led his father to risk so much in the past to save that commoner. Granville expresses his sorrow over the loss of their friend, but firmly states that without Rodden's actions at that moment, the village would never have achieved its current prosperity. Because of that, the Baron declares that he wishes to honor such bravery with another reward and says that Rodden may ask for anything he wants. Alan congratulates his father and comments that he should ask for a fine drink, but Rodden humbly requests something different. He asks the Baron to allow Alan to work on his estate. Granville consults his butler, and Sebas says he sees no problem with the request. As a result, the Baron accepts Alan as a personal servant of the Granville family. Alan's reaction is one of complete displeasure. He realizes that this could destroy his plans to leave the village, level up, and explore new regions. As he thinks of a way to refuse his father's decision, he notices that Rodden is crying tears of happiness. Seeing that, Alan swallows his dissatisfaction and silently accepts. The following morning, Derja helps her son get ready as they say their goodbyes. Outside, Krina and the others are already waiting to bid him farewell. Krina looks a little sad, and Alan invites her to one last duel before he leaves. The girl eagerly accepts. This time, surprisingly, Alan begins to gain the upper hand during the fight. He used all of his points to generate more bird cards and invested everything in speed. With this strategy, he manages to defeat Krina, but soon says that the match should be considered a draw. He suggests that they settle it in the future when they meet again, even though, in his thoughts, he believes they may never see each other again. As everyone says their farewells, Palomas and Dagora also appear. Dagora gives Alan a dagger as a farewell gift. After that, Alan departs together with his mother and father. During the journey, Rodden comments that becoming a personal servant is only the first step and emphasizes that Alan must work very hard if he wants to go far. When they arrive at the departure point, Derja tells him that if things ever become too difficult, he can always come back home. They say goodbye once again before Alan continues on his way. As he moves farther away, he looks out from the carriage and sees his mother crying. When they arrive at the Baron's residence, Alan is immediately surprised by the size of the mansion. The building is much larger than he had imagined, leaving him impressed right from the start. Sometime later, Alan begins working as Cecil's personal servant, a task that turns out to be more difficult than he expected. The girl is quite demanding and constantly expects his attention, making Alan realize that the job would be far from easy. At one point, Alan is astonished to see an object flying through the sky and, curious, wonders if it might be an aircraft. Cecil quickly explains that it is a magic ship. Upon hearing that, Alan remembers Palomas talking about tools powered by magic stones, but realizes that this is the first time he has seen something as impressive as a magic ship operating in such a way. A few days later, Alan wakes up to the gentle fragrance of the summoned plants that he himself had cultivated. After getting up, he heads to the dining hall reserved for the servants to have breakfast. There, he sits beside Rickle, the head servant. Rickle asks whether Alan has been managing well with Cecil, but Alan's exhausted expression answers before he can say a single word. Rickle comments that this happens because Alan is a servant. If he were merely a messenger, Cecil's demands would be much less demanding. Curious, Alan asks what exactly the difference is between a servant and a messenger. Rickle explains, in general, that the servants of that household are treated almost like members of the family, while messengers do not receive that kind of treatment. Upon hearing that, Alan finally understands why his father had cried tears of joy when it was decided that he would serve the Baron's family. Later, during the Baron's meal with his family, Alan is surprised to notice how simple the food is, quite different from what he had imagined for someone of such high status. The Baron's wife praises Alan, saying that he quickly learned the basics necessary to become a good servant, and also thanks him for his hard work. The Baron expresses his satisfaction with Alan's performance and reflects that the boy does not even possess a special talent. Upon hearing that, Alan realizes that the Baron had investigated his past. When Cecil discovers that Alan has no talent whatsoever, she smiles and boasts about possessing the sorcerer talent. Alan remembers that it is considered a very good talent, classified with 2 stars. He also recalls that Cecil's older brother, Mihai, possesses the swordsman talent. Cecil's father immediately reprimands her, stating that she should not boast because of her talent. At that moment, Tomas, the other brother, begins to cry, as he is the only member of the family who has no talent at all. His father tries to comfort him, saying that he will attend the noble school in the royal capital. However, Tomas says that he would like to go to the academic city, just as Mihai did. His father, being realistic, explains that this is not possible, since the academic city only accepts people with talent. He comments that he also has no talent and therefore attended the noble school, but emphasizes that it was thanks to that he was able to meet his wife. After hearing all of this, Cecil apologizes to her brother, but casts an irritated glance toward Alan, as if blaming him for the situation. During the afternoon, Alan goes for a walk around the city, taking advantage of his free time. He heads to the Adventurers Guild and asks whether he can become an adventurer, mentioning that he is already 8 years old. The receptionist informs him that registration as an adventurer is only allowed from the age of 12 onward. Not giving up, Alan heads over to the quest board in search of more information. He asks an adventurer why several quests do not specify a particular location. The adventurer explains that this is because those monsters can be found almost anywhere. He adds that the farther away from the city they are, the greater the reward and the stronger the monsters rank. The closer they are, the weaker they tend to be. Alan notices a few quests offering good rewards that also specify the exact location, so he asks why no one accepts them. The adventurer replies that the reason is simple. The monster involved is extremely powerful, and no one wants to risk fighting it. Shortly afterward, the adventurer's companions arrive, and Alan decides to leave. The following morning, Alan runs to the city gates and shows the Granville family's emblem to the guard, thereby obtaining permission to leave. Upon reaching a denser part of the forest, he summons his bird, Hawkins, and gives it several orders. The creature carries out everything perfectly, which Alan understands to be the result of Hawkins having 150 intelligence points. He then summons more Hawkins birds and orders them to search the area for monsters. After that, he summons his tiger and tries to give it commands, but realizes that the animal is unable to understand everything. Alan concludes that this must be because the tiger has only 28 intelligence points. A short while later, Hawkins finds some monsters and leads Alan to their location. It is a small group consisting of 5 goblins. As soon as they notice Alan's presence, the creatures charge at him without hesitation. In response, Alan summons 5 tigers, causing the goblins to halt their attack. Soon afterward, he summons 5 more tigers to completely surround the enemies. Alan explains to himself that he can summon his creatures at any point within his field of vision, as long as it is within a radius of 50 meters. He then orders the tigers to attack and immediately afterwards summons the butterfly, which releases its sleeping powder, causing the remaining goblins to fall asleep. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Alan eliminates every one of them. Afterward, he removes the magic stones left behind by the creatures and asks his summons to notify him if they find any more goblins within a radius of 3 kilometers. In this way, Alan continues defeating various creatures until nightfall. By the end, he accumulates 16,050 experience points, enough to gain 2 levels. During that time, Alan learns that when his butterfly attacks goblins, there is an 80% chance of putting them to sleep. Excited by the results, Alan orders the Hawkins to continue searching for monsters. However, the birds remain still, unable to see properly in the dark. This leaves Alan somewhat uneasy, as he had been relying on the Hawkins to find the way back to the city during the night. About a month later, Alan went to a blacksmith in the city to pick something up. He had asked the blacksmith to produce 3 iron balls. The idea was to use those balls instead of stones when fighting monsters. As he walked through the streets, he remarked to himself that he had already gone hunting 2 more times since then and had now reached level 12. Upon arriving home, Alan tries to enter quietly. believing that he will be able to slip by unnoticed. However, Sebas notices him immediately and escorts him to the Baron. Granvelle praises him, stating that over the past 2 months, Alan had proven himself to be a very capable servant. Even so, the Baron is curious about how Alan has been spending his days off. He always left very early and only returned after dark, although it was clear that Alan was free to use his spare time however he wished. Granvelle wanted to stay informed about his activities. Without hiding anything, Alan explains that he has been hunting monsters in the forest outside the city. Granvelle asks what the reason for that is. Alan replies that he is the son of Rodden, the boar hunter, and that the instinct for hunting runs in his blood. Granvelle accepts the explanation without showing any objection. After all, Alan was the son of someone considered a legend. At that moment, Sebas asks whether Alan has been selling the horned rabbits he has been hunting to nearby butcher shops. Alan realizes that Sebas believes he has only been hunting rabbits and therefore confirms that he has been selling the meat. Sebas then tells him that he should stop doing that and start selling directly to the Baron, who will buy each package of meat for 1 silver coin. To Alan, that meant he could now hunt openly and still get paid for it. 6 months later, Alan is in the forest planning to hunt 100 goblins that day. While he is getting ready, his birds return in a hurry, behaving strangely. Sensing that something is wrong, Alan decides to follow them. Before long, he comes across the group of adventurers he had met earlier at the guild. They are surrounded by goblins, and the leader of the group is gravely wounded. As soon as the goblins charge to attack, Alan springs into action by throwing the iron balls. Since he still cannot summon his creatures in front of other people, he has to fight using the dagger he received from Dagora. Alan asks the girl to take care of the goblin that is missing one of its hands while he goes to face the other one. Now that he has reached level 12 and his attack and agility bonuses are above 300, those creatures pose no danger whatsoever. As a result, Alan begins defeating them one after another without much difficulty. After the battle ends, everyone's attention turns to Levin. The girls fall into despair, believing that Levin might die right there. Alan comments that Levin would not survive the trip back to the city in that condition and says that he will try to help him using a medicinal herb. He then takes out a leaf of life, cultivated through one of his plant-type cards. Alan knows that the leaf restores HP, but he is not sure whether it will be enough. The moment he brings the leaf close to the wound, it begins to shine brightly and completely heals Levin. The girls are extremely relieved and happy to realize that Levin has fully recovered. Levin himself is surprised to see that his wound has disappeared. Alan then notices that Rita also has a minor injury and decides to use another leaf of life to heal her. Rita asks whether it is a Mueller's leaf, while the other girl comments with deep gratitude that it is a very rare healing item, and that Alan has used 2 of them just to help them. Alan replies that there is no need to worry. He then stands up with the intention of leaving, but Levin asks if he can at least repay the favor, since he owes him his life. In Alan's thoughts, his only wish is to leave as quickly as possible so that he can reach his hunting goal for the day. Because of that, he only asks them not to tell anyone about him and explains that he has been collecting magic stones. Alan asks whether Levin could gather 100 rank E magic stones for him. Levin is surprised to realize that this is his only request, but accepts without hesitation. After that, they say their goodbyes. As he walks through the forest, Alan reflects that it had taken his father about a month to recover when they used the Mueller's flower on him. Levin, on the other hand, had been healed almost instantly after receiving the leaf of life. From this, Alan concludes that the Mueller's flower restores an amount of HP based on the maximum value, functioning as a percentage-based healing item. On the other hand, the leaf of life restores a fixed amount of HP. Shortly afterward, Alan summons his bird and asks why the creature ignored his orders. He had clearly instructed it to find a group of 5 or more goblins, but instead, the bird had led him to the injured adventurers. Alan wonders whether Hawkins wanted to save them, and that was why it guided him to that place. Hawkins responds by nodding its head. Alan is surprised by that behavior, since he had believed that his summons existed only to provide bonuses. However, Hawkins had prioritized its own feelings instead of following the order it had received. This leaves Alan satisfied and happy with the way his summon acted. The scene then shifts to Alan helping Cecil reach a jar of jam that was on a high shelf. She wanted to use the jam to make cookies for her older brother, who was about to return. However, during the attempt, the two of them lose their balance and end up falling together. The narrative moves forward to the end of December. Everyone is gathered around the table, eating a soup made with horned rabbits that Alan had hunted. While they eat, Xenoph comments that the village of Krina managed to reach the goal of hunting 20 wild boars. Upon hearing that, Tamaz finds it strange and asks why they are not having wild boar meat for dinner that year. Alan also finds the situation curious, but concludes that, most likely, all of the meat was sent to the king. The Baron's wife agrees that it is a shame they do not have any wild boar available, since that could end up affecting the New Year's celebrations. Hearing that, Tamaz suggests that next time Alan should try hunting a white deer. The Baron's wife immediately shows concern, saying that it would be far too difficult a task for someone like him. Even so, the boy calmly replies that it would not be a problem and states that he will hunt the white deer. The scene then shifts to Alan digging a trap in the middle of the snow. Shortly afterward, Hawkins returns and informs him that he has located the deer. When Alan arrives at the indicated location, he realizes that the monster is much larger than he had imagined. He then summons his frogs, which use their taunt skill. Whenever the deer gets close, Alan calls them back. Soon afterward, he summons the frogs a little farther ahead and repeats the same process. In this way, he gradually guides the creature until the deer falls directly into the trap. Thus, Alan manages to defeat the white deer. Upon returning to the mansion, the servants are thrown into complete panic, believing that a monster is invading the estate. The panic only subsides when everyone sees Alan emerging from beneath the creature's enormous body. The Baron and his family are also visibly surprised by the sight. Impressed, Granville asks Sebas to investigate Alan once again, as he finds it difficult to believe that someone capable of defeating a rank C beast possesses no special talent. During the night, Sebas calls Alan to speak with him in a private room. He explains that the boy will be promoted to the position of hunter. From that moment on, Alan will be responsible for hunting monsters to provide meat for the family, as well as protecting the townspeople in the event of monster attacks. As part of this change, his salary will double, increasing from 50 to 100 silver coins. To Alan, that sounds perfect, since he will now be able to go hunting whenever he wants. However, Sebas is quick to clarify that he will still continue serving as Cecil's personal servant and will not need to go hunting every single day. The story moves forward to March of the new year. Cecil and Alan go to pick up her brother, Mihai. As soon as the girl sees him, she immediately runs over to hug him. She then introduces Alan to her brother, explaining that he is now fulfilling two roles at the same time, serving both as a servant and as a hunter. Mihai watches Alan for a few moments and comments that he must be very talented to be able to hunt monsters at such a young age. Shortly afterward, he gives his sister a brooch as a gift, and then everyone heads back home. As he watches the two siblings together, Alan finds himself wondering how his own family is doing. The following morning, Alan heads out for another hunt. When he returns, he is greeted by the head chef and Rickel, who comments that Mihai is training with Xenoph. Curious, Alan heads over to the training area and is impressed by what he sees. As soon as the duel ends, Xenoph praises Mihai, stating that he has become much stronger compared to the previous year. At that moment, Cecil notices Alan's presence and walks over to speak with him. After seeing the number of monsters Alan has hunted, Mihai comments that he would really like to spar with him. Alan accepts immediately, since the goal is to find out whether Alan truly possesses any special talent. The Baron and Xenoph decide not to interfere. Xenoph even offers to lend the boy his sword. Alan reflects that his stats are optimized for hunting monsters, but even so, he believes he can win, since he has already reached level 20. When Xenoph gives the signal for the fight to begin, Alan charges forward without hesitation. He thinks he should hold back to avoid hurting Mihai, but he is soon surprised to realize that the young man is far stronger and faster than he had expected. The outcome does not take long to appear, and Alan ends up being disarmed, suffering defeat. After that, Alan acknowledges that Mihai was on a completely different level from him. Cecil comments on how much stronger her brother had become. Mihai explains that it happened because he explored a dungeon during the summer and also had the opportunity to learn swordsmanship directly from Diverg, known as the Lord of the Sword. Upon hearing that, Alan immediately becomes excited, imagining how incredible it would be to explore a dungeon. Cecil then asks her brother when he would come back to visit them. Mihai replies that it would probably be in the summer of the following year. Taking advantage of the moment, Alan asks to train with him when that happens. Mihai agrees, but asks in return that Alan take very good care of his sister. A few days pass, and it is time for Mihai to return to the Academy City. The farewell is not easy, and Cecil ends up crying as she watches her brother leave, showing just how much she missed him. At the beginning of April, Viscount Carnal pays a visit to Baron Granville's estate. During the meeting, Alan serves a portion of meat to the visitor. While carrying out the task, he remembers the warning he had received from Rickle, who had advised him to be careful around Carnal. The Viscount holds a higher rank than the Baron, and the two families have maintained a rivalry that has lasted for centuries. After tasting the meat, Carnal expresses his satisfaction and asks if it is the famous wild boar meat he had heard so much about. Granville casually confirms it. However, Alan knows that, in reality, the meat being served is horned rabbit meat. He imagines that the Baron did not want to waste wild boar meat on a meal offered to the Viscount. After clearing away the plate, Alan recalls the explanation Rickle had given him earlier. The White Dragon Mountains contain several mithril mines scattered across both territories. However, because the White Dragon built its nest in the section belonging to the Granvilles, the family cannot access the mines. Even so, there is one important detail. The dragon is unpredictable and moves its territory every 100 years. This means that, about a century earlier, it was Carnal's domain that faced similar difficulties. Without beating around the bush, Granville asks the true reason for the Viscount's visit. Carnal explains that his youngest daughter had recently gone through the appraisal ceremony and that he came to share the result. Upon hearing that, Alan begins to wonder if his brother had awakened as a spearman. Carnal then comments in a satisfied tone that, fortunately, his daughter possessed no talent whatsoever. Granville reacts with irritation, something that leaves Alan confused, since, to him, having a talent seemed like something positive. Carnal goes on to say that it was a shame because two of the Baron's children possessed talent. Granville responds by reminding him that Carnal's eldest son also has talent, stating that the Viscount understands the weight of those responsibilities well, since both of them must fulfill their duties as nobles. After the conversation, Alan escorts Carnal to the exit of the estate. At the beginning of October, Alan goes to the Adventurers Guild and speaks with Levin's party. He informs them that he intends to hunt in areas farther away from the city and asks the group to share information about rank C monsters. Levin warns him about the danger, explaining that a single mistake can be fatal, even for adventurers of that level. Alan agrees, emphasizing that this is precisely why he needs detailed information. Rita then comes up with an idea and suggests that everyone go shopping. Alan gets excited, since it would be the first time he entered an equipment shop. He tries on a few items and eventually chooses a cape. Shortly afterward, he heads toward the forest, thinking that acquiring equipment had always been something he greatly enjoyed doing in games. A short while later, Hawkins appears, informing him that he has located a rank C monster. As he approaches, Alan realizes that it is an orc that is sleeping. He summons several tigers and orders them to attack, managing to defeat the creature with ease. Alan thinks that this type of monster would be ideal for continuing to fight and level up. Soon afterward, another bird appears to get his attention. This time, the target is an armored ant, also classified as rank C. As soon as the creature notices his presence, Alan orders his monsters to attack. However, the tiger's claws fail to inflict any damage. Faced with that, he changes his strategy and uses his butterflies, successfully putting the creature to sleep. Taking advantage of the opportunity, he tries to remove the magic stone, but his dagger cannot pierce the armor. After a great deal of effort, he finally defeats the monster, but still fails to obtain the magic stone. Observing that his intelligence stat is high, Alan begins to believe that he might have the potential to learn magic. The following morning, Alan asks for permission to attend classes alongside Sissel, as a gift for having completed 1 year as her personal servant. During the lesson, he gets straight to the point and asks the teacher whether he has an aptitude for magic. The teacher takes out a crystal ball and asks Alan to place his hand on it. However, nothing happens. Confused, Alan begins to question what the point of having such high intelligence actually is. The story shifts to the Baron's family gathered around the table, enjoying another peaceful meal. However, the calm does not last long. Rico rushes in with alarming news. A Margargalsh was approaching the city. As soon as he hears this, the Baron immediately asks about Captain Zenoff. Sebas replies that the captain and his men had gone out on a hunt and would not return for another 2 days. Faced with this situation, the Baron orders someone to contact the Adventurers Guild. Alan, who was nearby listening to everything, asks for permission to help keep the monster away from the city. Cecil immediately scolds him, reminding him that he was just a servant. Even so, Alan firmly replies that he was also the Granville family's hunter. Without waiting for any further response, he runs toward the city entrance. As he races through the streets, he sees countless residents fleeing in desperation, trying to save themselves. Along the way, Alan recalls that the Margargalsh was a rank B monster. For the adventurers of that city, fighting it would be practically impossible. On top of that, there was another problem. Earlier that morning, he had used up all of his MP while training and gaining experience for his skills. Shortly afterward, Alan arrives at the city entrance. There, he hears a man desperately begging the guards to save his wife and daughter, who were trapped inside a carriage. Looking in the indicated direction, Alan sees the enormous monster advancing toward the vehicle. He has no intention of allowing that to happen. Without hesitation, he charges toward the Margargalsh and hurls a metal ball directly into the creature's eye. The attack immediately catches the monster's attention. Taking advantage of that moment, Alan starts running away from the city, trying to lure the creature elsewhere. As he runs, he focuses on avoiding the monster's violent attacks. During the escape, he quickly opens his grimoire and notices something important. His MP had already fully recovered. Without wasting any time, he begins reorganizing his summons, focusing mainly on the butterflies and the birds to increase his speed bonus. After preparing everything, Alan keeps running while making sure the monster continues chasing him. He summons the butterflies in an attempt to put the creature to sleep, but nothing happens. Thinking that the monster's resistance was greater than he had expected, he summons even more butterflies. Even so, nothing changes. With no other alternative, Alan realizes that the only thing he can do at that moment is keep running. After several minutes of non-stop running, he finally manages to lose sight of the monster. Since his summons had no effect and he had already led the creature far away from the city, he decides it would be best to return. However, at that exact moment, the Margargalsh reappears and starts chasing him once again. The scene shifts and Alan finally returns to the city. As soon as he reaches the entrance, a guard rushes over to support him before he collapses unconscious. When he opens his eyes again, he realizes that Cecil and Sebas are with him. Cecil shows relief upon seeing that he was safe, but she also scolds him for making her worry so much. After confirming that Alan was able to stand, Sebas asks him to prepare himself to tell the Baron everything that had happened. Some time later, Alan stands before the Baron. He apologizes for not being able to defeat the monster and also for causing so much trouble. Granville and Zenoff tell him that he has no reason to blame himself. On the contrary, they acknowledge that he had shown great courage. Next, the Baron hands him 2 bags filled with gold coins. One of them is a reward for successfully driving the monster away from the city. The other comes from the family he had saved. Before ending the conversation, the Baron asks only that Alan try not to wander so far from the city during future hunts. Alan replies that he will be more careful next time. As he thinks about it, he imagines that the money could be used to buy a mithril sword. A few days later, Alan is hunting monsters once again, now using his new mithril sword. After defeating an armored ant, he decides that it is the perfect moment to carry out a few experiments. Then he calls his Hawkins. he has two of them come closer and asks the third one to stay a little farther away. Next, he turns one of the Hawkins into a card, takes several different objects out of his grimoire, and places one of them inside a bag. After that, he asks one of the Hawkins to point out which object was inside the bag. The bird gives the correct answer. The same thing happens with another newly summoned Hawkin. However, when he calls the Hawkin that had been flying farther away, it is unable to identify which object was inside the bag. Alan then decides to perform another test. He creates a new Hawkin card and asks the same question again. This time, the answer is correct. For the final test, he summons the bird Papo and asks the same question. However, Papo is unable to guess which object was inside the bag. From these tests, Alan realizes something interesting. Summoned creatures are able to share and update information with one another, but this only happens with copies that have been newly created or recently summoned. Creatures that had already been summoned beforehand do not automatically share this information. Furthermore, this synchronization only occurs between creatures of the same species. The scene shifts once again, now to the beginning of March. Alan was training with Mihai. As expected, the training session ends with Mihai's victory. After training, everyone goes to have lunch. During the meal, they tell Mihai that Alan had faced a Margorgolsh. Mihai is quite surprised to hear the story. Alan, however, tries to downplay what happened, saying that it was not all that impressive. Cecil does not miss the chance to laugh and reminds everyone that, after the fight, Alan ended up sleeping for 2 straight days. In the middle of the conversation, Thomas asks Mihai if he would have been able to defeat that monster. Mihai replies that he would not. He explains that rank B monsters were far too powerful for someone to fight alone. Suddenly, a soldier enters with urgent news. The white dragon had migrated. Everyone is surprised by the information. The Baron decides to act immediately and orders the knights to inspect the mines. Zenoff, however, suggests a different approach. He explains that it would be better to first locate the dragon's new nest and only then check the condition of the mining areas. The Baron agrees with the suggestion. Mihai offers to accompany the mission, but Zenoff refuses. He explains that it was an extremely dangerous task and that it could take several months to complete. Meanwhile, Alan was thinking about something completely different. As soon as the knights start defeating the monsters, he will lose his chance to gain experience and level up, so he needs to come up with a plan. Sometime later, while resting beneath a tree, Alan opens his grimoire and realizes that he had reached level 5 as a summoner. As a result, he had gained a new skill called Share. Curious, he decides to test it using his Hawkins. The moment he activates the skill, something incredible happens. Alan begins seeing through the bird's eyes. Thanks to that, he is able to observe the entire forest from the sky and even control the bird's movements. To him, it feels as though he were playing on several screens at the same time. Excited by the discovery, he decides to try something even bolder. He summons several Hawkins and uses the skill on all of them. It works. He then adds a tiger to the experiment, and the skill continues to function. However, when he tries to include a 6th creature, he feels a sharp headache. As a result, he realizes that his current limit is controlling 5 creatures at the same time. After thinking about it for a while, Alan concludes that this limit is probably tied to his intelligence. By increasing his stats, he is able to raise his control to 6 simultaneous summons. With this new possibility in mind, he forms a small team of creatures and sends them off to hunt monsters on their own. The summons work together in perfect coordination. Some immobilize the enemies, others launch attacks, while the rest provide buffs for the group. Thanks to this strategy, they are able to defeat many monsters. In addition, Alan discovers that one of his creatures is capable of producing a fruit that restores 1000 MP. With his team well organized, he realizes something very important. Now he could gain experience every day, even without being present in the battles. Later, using the share skill once again, Alan watches his family from afar. He sees Krina and his brother training, his father busy with work, and his mother taking care of his younger sister. Before leaving, he places a gold coin on the window of the house. In silence, he promises himself that he will send more money every month. 6 months passed, and Zenoff went to the Baron to explain the current situation. He said that, after being abandoned for so long, the mines and the surrounding settlements had ended up becoming true monster hideouts. According to him, reopening the nearest mine would not be a quick task, taking at least 3 years to return to normal operations. After hearing this, the Baron asked Zenoff to give it his highest priority and try to speed up the process as much as possible. Watching everything unfold, Alan could not understand why the Baron was in such a hurry. Zenoff also talked about what had happened to Viscount Carnal. He explained that the Viscount had tried to resume the mining operations on his own, but had ended up provoking the White Dragon's wrath. The rumors said that, as a result, all the miners in his territory had been reduced to ashes. While listening to that, Alan silently reflected that he intended to leave the Viscount's family within 2 years. Until then, he decided that he would help the Baron by eliminating some of the monsters threatening the region. The scene then shifts to Alan already in action, attacking one of the settlements overrun by goblins. While his summons advanced and fought the enemies, he thought that, in games, he usually let monsters respawn by leaving the spawn point intact, using that to gain experience easily. However, he understood that this reality was completely different, since goblins fed on humans. For that reason, he decided that he would not let a single one survive. Shortly afterward, a goblin king appeared to face Alan. Even though it was a stronger creature, it ended up being defeated without difficulty by one of the summoned bears. By the end of that day's battle, Alan had accumulated 42,000 experience points. In his thoughts, he planned to eliminate all the goblin nests in the region before moving on to greater challenges, such as the settlements occupied by orcs. When March arrived, Mihai returned after completing his training at the academy. Cecil quickly noticed that something was different about him, as he seemed more discouraged than usual. Even so, Mihai followed his routine and went to train with Alan. The rest of the family also began to notice that he was not acting as he normally did. Before the fight began, Alan reorganized his attributes in the most efficient way possible. He did this because Mihai had made it clear that he wanted to fight him without any restraint. As soon as Zenoff gave the signal to begin, Alan launched his attack with everything he had, but Mihai managed to block every strike with precision. In the end, the victory belonged to Mihai. After the fight, Alan thought about thanking him for the duel, but Mihai simply kept walking without stopping. Cecil commented that Alan had become much stronger, but he still had not reached her brother's level. Then Mihai said that he needed to talk to his siblings. He explained that he had to fulfill his duty as a noble, which meant that he would not be returning home anytime soon. Thomas did not understand exactly what that duty was, but Mihai replied that he could not reveal any more details. When Cecil asked when he would be leaving, Mihai answered that it would be the very next day. Trying to reassure her, he said that he would return after 3 years. The following morning, Mihai said goodbye to everyone. Before getting into the carriage, he asked Alan to take care of his sister in his place. As they watched the carriage disappear into the distance, Alan had the impression that Mihai was trembling. When May arrived the following year, Alan had already reached level 35. At that moment, he was preparing to attack an orc settlement. He organized his summons and began the assault. The bears charged directly at the enemies, while the bronze were responsible for protecting the rear. The spiders immobilized opponents who attacked from a distance, such as the archers. With this well-defined strategy, Alan managed to invade the settlement. The ordinary orcs did not pose much of a threat, but suddenly a fireball came flying toward him. Alan found it strange because he did not know that orc shamans existed. Since he could not get close easily, he decided to throw an iron ball, successfully defeating one of the shamans. He considered repeating the attack against the other two, but when he looked again, he realized that they had already hidden themselves. Meanwhile, a new group of orcs began approaching the battlefield. Faced with that situation, Alan decided that he would not remain on the defensive and chose to go on the offensive. He still had enough capacity to summon 20,000 bears and was carrying 100 MP recovery items, so he ordered his summons to advance without hesitation. However, at that very moment, the Orc King finally appeared. The bears rushed toward him, but they were destroyed with a single blow. Even though Alan continued summoning more creatures, the result was the same. as they were all quickly wiped out. As if that were not enough, the shamans resumed their attacks, launching fireballs that destroyed the summons responsible for defending him. Realizing the danger, Alan asked one of the bears to protect him, but he was still sent flying by the impact. Not knowing exactly what to do, he realized that he was in a difficult situation, as he needed to face the boss while also trying to survive the shaman's attacks. Just as he began thinking about retreating and giving up on the battle, Xenoph suddenly appeared. That left Alan confused, because according to his calculations, the knights were only supposed to arrive the following day. Xenoph asked what was going on, and Alan explained that he was trying to eliminate the orc settlement. At that moment, Alan realized that Xenoph had seen his summons, so he quickly ordered all of them to return. Even so, Xenoph did not seem bothered by it at all. He stated that he would personally take care of the Orc King and ordered Leibrand to deal with the rest. The Orc King launched a powerful attack, but Xenoph blocked it as if it were nothing. Leibrand commented that Xenoph had earned a nickname because of his strength on the battlefield, being known as the Demon of War. Shortly afterward, Leibrand also sprang into action, concentrating energy into his spear before striking the air, hitting a shaman from a distance. Alan watched everything in amazement. At that very moment, Xenoph charged forward and defeated the Orc King with a single sword strike. Later that night, Alan went to the knight's camp. Xenoph commented that he had already suspected something, but asked directly if it had been Alan who destroyed the goblin settlements. Alan confirmed that it was. Xenoph then thought to himself that Alan possessed an unusual talent and asked if the creatures fighting alongside him were part of that talent. Alan replied that they were. Then Xenoph explained that the Baron was already aware of this talent, and that was the reason Alan had been promoted to the family's hunter. Some time later, while Alan was helping wash Xenoph's back, the captain said that if the boy wanted to keep what had been seen that day a secret, he would not include it in his report. In return, he wanted Alan to keep him informed about the progress of his hunts. Alan accepted the offer. At the same time, he thought in surprise that it was incredible to see Xenoph still standing despite the countless scars covering his back. 2 weeks later, Alan managed to destroy an orc settlement. He began the attack by surrounding the area with 40 bears, striking the enemy from all sides. Then he ordered his summons to focus on the orcs who used magic, while he remained at a distance, simply summoning more cards to keep the assault going. When September arrived, a royal messenger appeared at the Baron's residence. He delivered a diary that belonged to Mihai and informed them that Mihai had completed his mission but had died in battle. The news left everyone in shock. Overcome with emotion, the Baron questioned aloud why his son had been sent to such a dangerous place immediately after graduating from the academy, as if he had been chosen to die. The messenger asked if that was the message the Baron wished to have delivered to the king. Shortly afterward, he left the estate. Alan remembered that Mihai had been acting differently before leaving and began to think that he had already known what his fate would be. Cecil then asked her father what was really happening, and the Baron asked everyone to leave the room, allowing only her to remain. Throughout the mansion, the servants could be heard crying over Mihai's death. Alan heard Cecil shouting at her father, saying that he had already known Mihai was going to die. The Baron tried to explain that it was part of the obligations that nobles had to fulfill. Even so, Cecil could not accept it and ran away. Alan found himself wondering if there was some hidden rule about being a noble that forced people to accept such a cruel fate. The following day, the servants reported that Cecil had disappeared. Alan noticed that the window of her room was open, indicating that she had left through it. Without wasting any time, he ran off to try to find her. While wandering aimlessly, the girl began to grow tired and decided to stop, sitting down on the sidewalk. In silence, she took out the hair clip she had received from her brother and stared at it for a few seconds. That brought back what she had read in his diary. Mihai had written that the following day he would be sent to a dangerous area and that he had a bad feeling, as if he would not make it back alive. Shortly afterward, Alan appeared. When she noticed him, she asked if he had come to take her back. He replied that he had not, explaining that he was there only to continue serving her as he always did. At that moment, her stomach growled, revealing her hunger. Alan then opened his grimoire, took out some food, and offered it to her. The girl accepted and began eating a piece of fruit, but she could not hold back her tears. As she ate, she remembered that Mihai had also written that he was afraid, that all he wanted was to return home and stay by his family's side. Cecil commented that she would probably end up dying the same way her brother had, but made it clear that she did not want that fate for herself. That was when Alan asked if she would consider running away with him. Surprised, she questioned whether he had gone crazy, saying that they could not do something like that. Without being shaken, Alan suggested another possibility. The two of them could register as adventurers when they turned 12 years old. Even so, Cecil pointed out that by then she would be studying at the academy. Alan replied that she was not obligated to follow that path, because it was her life, and only she could decide how she wanted to live. He then asked what she truly wanted. His words remained in Cecil's mind. Thinking about everything that had happened and remembering the brother she had lost, she made a decision. She said that she wanted to go back home. However, before that, she asked Alan to carry her on his back, since her legs were sore. When they arrived, Cecil apologized to her father for running away. The Baron replied that she did not need to worry, explaining that they would soon be able to extract mithril, which could secure an even stronger position as nobles. Even after hearing that, Cecil firmly responded that, as a member of the Granville family, she intended to fulfill her responsibilities. She stated that she would follow her brother's path and would no longer run away from what she needed to do. 6 months passed, and during that time Alan helped the knights eliminate all of the orc settlements. Gravel commented to Zinoff that they were finally beginning to transfer people to reactivate the mithril refineries near the mines. Zinoff replied that, by all indications, mining would begin in the summer. At another moment, Alan was seen climbing a mountain. Upon reaching the top, he encountered several armored ants as well as the entrance to a large anthill. From what he knew, that type of nest usually housed more than 1,000 of those creatures, along with the queen ant, who was classified as rank B and was responsible for producing new ants through her eggs. Alan was fully aware that entering the anthill directly would be extremely risky. Because of that, he decided to reduce the number of enemies before making any deeper advance. He summoned his monsters and began the attack. This process was repeated over the course of several days. After a month, his condition was already showing clear signs of exhaustion. He had deep dark circles under his eyes, the result of sleepless nights. He went to the location twice a week, and even after defeating around 2,000 ants, he still had not managed to wipe out the entire colony. After another month of maintaining that same routine, Alan commented to himself that if he could devote himself entirely to hunting, he would probably have already finished the job. That was when he noticed a change. The ants had stopped leaving the anthill. That indicated that he could finally move on to the next step and face the queen. To do that, he summoned several hollow owls and used his ability to share vision with them, exploring the inside of the anthill from a distance. As they advanced, it became increasingly clear that the place was like a huge labyrinth. After a long search, already close to sunset, he finally located the chamber where the queen was. Without wasting any time, Alan ordered his bears to attack immediately. The battle began, and after some time, the worker ants were defeated. Without the protection of her guards, the queen ended up being defeated with ease. That even surprised him, leading him to think that she had been weakened after spending so much time producing the ants that he had been eliminating over the past 2 months. Since it was already getting late, Alan decided to spend the night there and return in the morning, already imagining that he would have to deal with the Baron's reaction for having taken so long. Before resting, he began looking for something that could serve as proof that he had eliminated the anthill. During that search, he ended up finding some ore at the site. The following morning, Alan brought with him the exoskeleton of the armored queen ant and explained that he had defeated the creature on White Dragon Mountain. Even so, both the Baron and Zenoff showed doubts, since neither of them had ever seen a queen ant up close. All they knew was that those creatures had a different coloration from ordinary ants. Zenoff also commented that, even with all the resources available, the cavalry would not have the capability to eliminate an entire colony. Remembering what he had found, Alan also presented the ore he had brought with him, saying that he had found it inside the queen's chamber. As soon as they saw the material, The Baron and Zenoff immediately recognized what it was: mithril. Because of that, they asked Alan to explain everything in as much detail as possible. Cecil, who was present, did not hide her surprise, since until then she had believed that he was exaggerating or making up that story. Later, already in the office, Alan pointed out on a map the exact location where he had found the anthill, in addition to handing over a sketch of the inside of the nest. With that information, there was no longer any doubt about what had happened. Zenoff stated that this meant Alan had discovered a new mithril mine, and because of that, he decided to immediately send his knights to investigate the area. Although Alan had left without permission, the Baron made it clear that he would not receive any punishment. On the contrary, he emphasized that the discovery of a new mithril vein was something extremely valuable. As a reward, he stated that Alan would be entitled to 30% of everything extracted from it. Upon hearing that, Alan could not hide his excitement. As time passed, the month of October arrived, and Alan finally turned 12 years old. The mine he had discovered would still take some time to be completed, with operations expected to begin the following year. With that in mind, he decided to talk to the Baron about his desire to become an adventurer and travel the world in search of new experiences. The scene shifts to the living room. A royal messenger and Viscount Carnal were present to speak with the Baron. The messenger brought a proposal intended to end the conflict between the Carnal and Granville families. According to him, both families were trapped in an unstable cycle, alternating between prosperity and decline, always influenced by the whims of the White Dragon. The royal family wanted to resolve that situation once and for all. After reading the proposal, the Baron appeared somewhat confused. The document suggested that the two families jointly manage White Dragon Mountain. The messenger then explained further, saying that the intention was for them to cooperate in the extraction of mithril and divide the profits equally. He also added that he had sought out the Vice Minister of Justice to personally draft the contract. According to him, Viscount Carnal had already signed it, and only the Baron's decision remained. Even so, Granville refused at that moment. He stated that he preferred to go to the capital to personally verify the situation before making any decision. The messenger reacted with irritation, questioning whether the Baron doubted his credibility. Remaining calm, the Baron replied that he simply could not accept something of such importance without first speaking directly with the king. Dissatisfied, the messenger left the place, accusing the Baron of being greedy and saying that such an attitude could bring consequences in the future. After the messenger's departure, the Baron also showed his indignation. He recalled that his family had faced hardships for an entire century, and that, just when an opportunity had finally appeared, someone was trying to demand half of everything. Because of that, he decided that as soon as Zenoff returned from his hunt, they would leave for the capital immediately. Some time later, Alan reflected on the situation. In his thoughts, he considered that it would be inappropriate to ask the Baron for permission to stop being a servant at such a delicate moment. However, before he could continue thinking, screams coming from Cecil's room caught his attention. Without hesitation, he ran there and found 3 bandits in the middle of a kidnapping. Alan tried to fight back. He adjusted his attributes, concentrating more strength to face the enemies. However, one of the bandits threw a smoke bomb, and the substance caused him to lose consciousness. When he woke up, he realized that both he and Cecil were tied up. Without wasting any time, he summoned the bird Choppy and used his vision-sharing ability to observe what was happening around him. That was when a man named Dagera entered the room. He questioned why they had brought the boy along. One of the bandits replied that Alan seemed skilled with a sword and that he might be sold for a good price. Before he could finish speaking, Dagera struck him in the stomach, making it clear that he did not have permission to make decisions on his own. In a cold tone, he warned that if it happened again, he would not hesitate to kill him. Before leaving, he also ordered that Alan be eliminated if he caused any trouble. Watching all of that, Alan concluded in his thoughts that Dagera was far more dangerous than the others. Meanwhile, the bandits continued talking. The man wearing the red hood did not understand why Dagera had been put in charge. The man with the eye patch explained that he was an experienced professional, someone who had fought in the war and was the only one among them capable of facing Zenoff. Alan began thinking of a way to free himself and defeat the 3 bandits in order to escape. However, as he tried to come up with a plan, he realized that his mithril sword was not with him. It had probably been left behind when he lost consciousness. Shortly afterward, one of the bandits left the room. Taking advantage of that opening, Alan sent Choppy to explore the area more thoroughly. At one point, one of the men noticed the bird's presence and became confused, wondering what an animal like that was doing on the ship. That also left Alan puzzled. In his thoughts, he knew that there was no sea within Granville territory. Looking through a window, he realized something unexpected. They were aboard a ship, but not an ordinary one, it was a magical ship. Continuing the exploration, Choppy reached a dining hall. There, Alan saw Viscount Carnal alongside the royal emissary. At that moment, everything became clear. That entire situation had been planned by the two of them. Their objective was to force Granville to accept the contract. If he refused, his own daughter would suffer the consequences. Meanwhile, back in the room, Cecil began to regain consciousness. As soon as she woke up, she started struggling in an attempt to free herself. One of the bandits stood up with the intention of attacking her, causing Alan to make an immediate decision. He summoned a butterfly that released an effect capable of putting one of the enemies to sleep. Taking advantage of the other's distraction, Alan managed to free himself and prepared for the confrontation that would follow. Alan summons his creatures and eliminates the bandits without much difficulty. However, in the middle of all that, Dagera suddenly appears and lands a direct blow on him. The enemy's speed is so absurd that Alan begins to wonder if it was some kind of teleportation ability. Needing to react quickly, he orders Choppy to imitate Carnal's voice. The plan works. Dagera is distracted for a brief moment, and at that instant Alan orders his spider to wrap him in webs. Taking advantage of the opening, he manages to leave the room carrying Cecil, while leaving a few bronze behind to hold Dagera back. Upon reaching a window, he says that the two of them need to jump off the ship. Before jumping, he adjusts his cards to increase his body's durability. Without hesitating, he throws himself outside. When he hits the ground, he feels intense pain, but soon uses one of his magical leaves to recover. Confused, Cecil begins questioning what is happening and how he is able to summon monsters. But Alan understands that there is no time for explanations. He puts her on his back and starts running. To keep track of the enemy's movements, he sends a few hollow owls to watch Dagera. Through them, he realizes that the man is following his trail, probably using some kind of tracking ability. Upon reaching the city walls, Alan uses his bronze in the air and begins jumping across their shields, avoiding leaving footprints in an attempt to throw the pursuer off his trail. After some time, he decides to stop in a forest to rest. The following morning, he resumes the journey toward the lands of Granville. When he activates vision sharing, he notices that Dagera is wandering in circles, trying to find any sign of his footprints. After several days of travel, they arrive at one of Baron Granville's command posts. Even so, Alan decides not to stop, as he understands that those knights would not be capable of stopping Dagera. To make matters worse, the enemy manages to kill the bird that was being used to monitor him. Further ahead, Alan notices something even more concerning. The Margargalsh he fought 3 years earlier is also on their trail. With two dangerous pursuers, he concludes that he needs to eliminate at least one of them. He then tells Cecil to hide. A short time later, he comes face to face with the monster. Alan summons his creatures, but they are unable to deal with the Margargalsh's power. The creature charges forward, and even with the bronze in use, it breaks through the defense and grabs Alan. While trying to crush him, Alan continuously heals himself with the leaves of life. Then, the monster brings him to its mouth and begins chewing him. Seeing that, Cecil falls into despair, believing that he did not survive. However, everything was part of Alan's plan. Taking advantage of the situation, he manages to pierce the Margargalsh's other eye from the inside. He had exchanged all of his enhancements for resistance and durability, which allowed him to withstand the attack. Soon afterward, he drives his dagger even deeper into the monster, successfully defeating it. With the victory, he receives 82,000 experience points. Cecil runs to him with tears in her eyes, still shaken because she thought he had died. But at that exact moment, Dagera finally catches up to them. Alan tells Cecil to get away, saying that he would hold the enemy off, but he ends up being kicked and sent flying. Dagera approaches with his sword in hand. Trying to help, Cecil casts a spell, but fails because she still does not have full control over her powers. In response, Dagera rushes forward and knocks her down with a strike. Alan tries to buy time by provoking his opponent, saying that he is despicable and that he heard, while they were still on the ship, that he was a coward who abandoned the war after only 1 year. The provocation works. Dagera becomes enraged and begins focusing all of his attacks on Alan. That time is enough for Xenoff to arrive at the scene, since Alan had sent Choppy to call him. Dagera launches a direct attack, but his strike cannot even pierce Xenoff's armor. In response, Xenoff releases his aura and activates his extra ability, called Aura Blade, defeating Dagera with a single attack. The scene then shifts to the moment they arrive at the mansion, where everyone gathers to welcome Cecil. Some time later, Alan reports everything to the Baron, explaining Carnal's plan together with the royal messenger and how they intended to use Cecil as a hostage to prevent Granvelle from informing the king. Upon hearing this, Granvelle becomes furious and tells Sebas to prepare the carriage, as he wishes to report everything immediately. Alan, however, asks him to wait. He explains that if he does that now, only Carnal will be held responsible, while the royal messenger may end up escaping without punishment. He then states that he will give up his share of the mithril mining rights and hand them over to the Baron, so they can be used as leverage to pressure the king into conducting a broader investigation. Granvelle is surprised by the proposal and asks if that is an attempt to bribe the royal family. Alan confirms that it is, explaining that, above all else, the priority should be protecting the family. Faced with that, the Baron accepts the proposal and states that he will make good use of the mining rights. After these events, the Baron took all the information to the king regarding Cecil's kidnapping, ensuring that everyone responsible would be judged and punished. As a reward for everything they had been through, the Baron allowed Alan and Cecil to participate in a special lesson about the responsibilities of the nobility. Right at the beginning, Cecil's teacher makes it clear that everything said there must remain a secret. In his thoughts, he reinforces that this information must not leave that room. He then presents a map of the world and begins the explanation, pointing out that the enormous landmass in the center was called the Central Continent. He also explains that everyone there lived in one of the kingdoms on that continent, known as the Kingdom of Ratash. The teacher continues, saying that the version known by most people was that the world was living in peace. However, he clarifies that this was not the truth. He explains that 112 years ago, a demon lord appeared on the so-called Forgotten Continent. This being began calling himself the Demon Lord of the End and demanded that the rulers of every country surrender to him. In his thoughts, the teacher considered it obvious that no one would accept such a demand. As a result, the event known as the Great Calamity began 62 years ago. During that period, the Demon Lord launched a massive offensive, controlling countless rank B or higher monsters to attack the Central Continent. The teacher describes that the destruction was enormous, with many deaths, and that 4 entire countries disappeared in just 4 years. He continues explaining that the invasion was not limited to the Central Continent. Other places were also attacked, such as the Bakis Empire, the Dwarf Kingdom, and the Elven continent known as Rosenheim. Faced with such a great threat, the Jaiamut Empire proposed the creation of an alliance among the 5 continents. From that decision onward, a system was established in which every country was required to found a magic academy. The teacher explains that every child born with a special talent would be trained at these academies before eventually being sent to fight on the front lines. Even with this strategy, the advance of the Demon Lord's army could not be stopped. The Jaiamut Empire lost 1/4 of its territory, leading many people to believe that the end was near. However, at that critical moment, Helmios was born, a child who received the hero talent, reigniting humanity's hope. The teacher continues by explaining that Helmios became the first human to possess the hero class. When he turned 15 and joined the front lines, the course of the war changed dramatically. He managed to push the Demon Lord's army back and, in just 5 years, recovered all the lands the Empire had lost. Even now, at 22 years old, Helmios continues leading the attacks on the front lines. The teacher then explains that what they knew as the duties of a noble was actually a rule requiring everyone born with talent within the nobility and the royal family to serve on the front lines for at least 3 years. He makes it clear in his thoughts that the war was still fierce and that, even with the hero fighting alongside them, half of the young people sent to the battlefield ended up losing their lives. The scene shifts to the 12th of November. The Baron hands Alan 3 bags of money as a reward. He explains that the first was for defeating the Margargalsh, the second for rescuing Cecil, and the third was an incentive for Alan to enroll in the academy alongside Cecil, serving as her protector during battles. In his thoughts, the Baron reveals that he had already suspected Alan possessed some kind of special talent. Without hiding anything, Alan states that his class is Summoner. Upon hearing this, the Baron is surprised, as he had never heard of anyone with that class. Alan then declares that he accepts protecting Cecil, but proposes a few changes regarding the reward. In his thoughts, he organizes his ideas before speaking. First, instead of receiving 400 gold coins, he asks the Baron to exempt both his family and Krina's family from paying any taxes. The Baron accepts this condition without hesitation. Next, Alan asks to officially resign from his position as a servant. Once again, the Baron agrees. However, he asks Sebas to give Alan a small sword bearing the Granville family's emblem. The Baron explains that, thanks to Alan's contributions, he was able to rise in rank and now holds the title of Viscount. That sword would serve as proof that Alan is a guest of the Granville family and that they would always do everything possible to help him, regardless of the situation. The Baron then expresses his gratitude for everything Alan had done during the 4 years he served under him. As he listens, Alan reflects silently. In his thoughts, he comes to the conclusion that, even with the hero's presence, the Demon Lord still represents a tremendous threat. This makes him realize that his role in that world may be important in restoring balance. With that, Alan accepts Granville's proposal. In his decision, he states that he will stand by Cecil's side, determined to face the Demon Lord and fight until he defeats him. And with that, we have reached the end of the first season of the anime Hell Mode, The Hardcore Gamer. If you want the continuation in the upcoming episodes, leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can keep up with the next videos. See you next time.